Clipper Audio presents an unabridged recording of The Business by Iain Banks, narrated by Barbara Rosenblatt. This work is copyrighted 1999 by Iain Banks. This recording is copyrighted 2000 by W.F. Howes Limited. Kate Tellman is a senior executive officer in The Business, a powerful and massively discreet trans-global organization whose origins predate the Christian Church, if not the Roman Empire itself. It has a permanent base in Antarctica and wants to buy its own state in order to acquire a seat at the United Nations. Financially transparent, internally democratic, and disavowing conventional familial inheritance, the character of The Business seems, even to Kate, to be vague to the point of invisibility. And now, The Business.
Prologue. Hello? Kate? Yes? It's Mike. Mike? Mike Daniels. Crush, Kate, don't... Mike, it's 4:37. I know what time it is. Mike, I'd really like to get back to sleep. I'm sorry, but it's fucking important. You should get some sleep, too. Maybe whatever it is won't seem so important after you've slept and sobered up. I'm not drunk. Will you just listen? I am. I'm listening to a drunk man. Go to sleep, Mike. Hold on. Aren't you due in Tokyo today? Yes. Right. So get some sleep. I'm going to switch the phone off now, Mike. I didn't mean to leave it on in the first... No! That's what I'm calling about. Tokyo. What? What about Tokyo? I can't go. What do you mean? Why not? You have to go. But I can't. Calm down. How can I be fucking calm? Some fucker's taken out half my teeth. Say that again. I said some fucker's taken out half my fucking teeth. Is this some sort of joke? Who the hell is this? It's me, for Christ's sake. It's Mike Daniels. It doesn't sound like the Mike Daniels I know. Of course not. I've had half my teeth taken out. Fuck's sake. Kate, wake up. I'm awake. Prove you're Mike Daniels. Tell me what you were going to Tokyo for. Oh, Christ. Pull yourself together. Tell me. Okay. I was going to Tokyo with ex-Parfit Solomonides to sign the first part of the Prajantan Island deal with the Kirita Shinizagi, CEO of Shimane Aerospace Corporation. Satisfied? Hold on. What? What are you... Hello? Hello, Kate. Okay, go on. What's this about your teeth? Your voice sounds echoey. You're in a bathroom, aren't you? Very astute. Where are you? You here in London? No, I'm in Glasgow. Now tell me what the hell's going on. Some bastard's taken out half my teeth. I'm looking at it in the mirror now. My mouth is all pink and... Oh, fuckers. Mike, come on, get it together. Tell me what happened. I was out. I went to a club. I met this girl. Uh-huh. Well, we ended up back at her place. Clubbing and picking up some floozy. Perfect preparation for the most important business trip of your career. Don't fucking go sanctimonious on me. Don't go what? Sanctimonious. Sancti-fucking-monious. Right. So, you went to a club and you scored. How did this lead to you losing half your teeth? Were they full of gold fillings? No. Well, was there a jealous boyfriend waiting for you back at her place? No. Well, I don't know. All I remember is having a snog and a drink, and the next thing I know, I'm waking up in my own flat and half my teeth are missing. What the fuck am I going to do? I can't go to Tokyo like this. Hold on. You woke up in your own flat? Yes, in my own bed. Well, on it. About 10 minutes ago. Nobody else there? No. Have you checked your wallet? Eh? No. Check it now, and try to find your keys. The phone clunked down. I sat frowning at the tiles on the far side of the bathroom. Mike came back. All there. Keys, money, credit cards? Everything. All there. Nothing missing in the flat? Not that I can see. Everything's here, apart from my fucking teeth. I take it you'd never met this girl before? No, I hadn't. Can you remember the address of her flat? Notting Hill somewhere, I think. Street? No idea. I was being distracted while we were in the taxi. I bet. You go to that club a lot? Fairly often. Kate, you still there? Still here. Mike, are you in pain? Mental fucking anguish. But my mouth is numb. Bleeding much? No. See any puncture marks on your gums? What? Hold on. I shivered. I pulled a towel from the chrome rack above the bath and wrapped it round myself, then sat on the toilet again. I could feel my frown deepening. I looked in the mirror. Not attractive. I pulled a hand through my hair with some difficulty. On the phone, Mike Daniel said, Could be. Few of them. Maybe 4. So your teeth weren't knocked out. They were extracted. What sort of fucking nutter takes out half somebody's teeth? Was this a dentist? Sounds like it. A central London dentist working serious overtime in the small hours of the morning. You better hope they don't send you the bill. This isn't funny. No, actually, your voice is quite funny, Mike. It's the implications that aren't. Well, I'm so fucking glad I'm still able to amuse you, Catherine. But what the fuck am I going to do? Have you reported this to the police? The police? What, you mean security? No, the London Metropolitan Police. No, I didn't think... Have you told anybody else? No, just you. Starting to regret it now. Well, it's up to you whether you call the civilian police or not. Personally, I don't know if I would. But do call company security and let them know. What can they do? Nothing, I guess. But you'd better let them know. And call the company credit card hotline. It's 24 hours. You on platinum? Gold, 24. Well, if they give you any shit, tell them you're calling on my authority. They might be able to find you a dentist who can do something. What? Half a mouthful of teeth before 10 a.m.? Is that when the flight is? That's check-in time. You unscheduled? Yes. Could we find you some more time by sending you on a company jet? Been discussed before all this happened. Too many fuel stops or something. How long after you arrive are you supposed to meet Shinazagi? About 4 hours. Mike? What? Exactly which teeth were removed? Huh? Well, I don't know. I don't know what you're all called. One of my front teeth, molars, left wisdom, just about half of them. Looks random. Can't see a pattern or anything. Different on top and bottom, different on each side. Well? Well, what? Any ideas? I've told you. Call the hotline. And call Adrian George. You should have called him in the first place. I'm on sabbatical, remember? I know you're on fucking sabbatical. I'm sorry I disturbed your beauty sleep, too, but I stupidly thought you might be able to help me. I am helping you. I'm telling you to call security, the company credit card hotline, and Adrian. So do so. But whatever happens, you have to make that flight. But I can't go like this. Stop wailing. I'm not wailing. Yes, you are. Stop it. You have to be in Tokyo tonight. Tomorrow night, whatever. It'll look very bad if you don't show up. Kirita Shinazagi is a stickler for these things. A stickler? A fucking stickler? What about being a stickler for executives having all their teeth? What if it's some horrendous cross-cultural insult in Japan to turn up to sign a deal with only 60% of your smile in place? I thought, as well as speaking the language, you were well-versed in Japanese culture, Mike. You must know whether that's the case or not. Look, can't we send somebody else? It's Parfit Solomonides who's doing the signing, not me. I'm just there as a glorified bagman. I don't think so. You've been in on this from the start. Kirito Shinizagi trusts you, and Mr. Parfit Solomonides doesn't speak Japanese. Frankly, even if Mr. Shinizagi wasn't expecting you, you'd have to go, because Mr. Parfit Solomonides is expecting you to be there. And if you ever hope to leave Level 4, you don't go upsetting Level 1 executives, because you have a dental problem. And Mr. Shinizagi is expecting you. If you didn't show, we might... Never mind. What? I didn't quite succeed in stifling a giggle. Are you? You're laughing. I can't fucking believe this. I'm sorry. I was going to say we might lose face. What? Oh, very fucking funny, Kate. Thank you. Now make those calls, and make that flight. Oh, Jesus! This is no time for superstition, Michael. Orthodontics is your only hope. You vicious bitch! You're enjoying this, aren't you? Not in the least. And never call me a bitch again, Michael. I'm sorry. Make the calls, Mike, and be sure you have some painkillers on hand for when the anesthetics wear off. Okay. Sorry to have disturbed you. That's all right, given the circumstances. I hope it all works out. And give my regards to Kirito Shinizagi. If I can still talk Japanese with no teeth. Just do your best. I'm sure they have very good dentists in Japan. Huh. Good night, Mike. Safe journey. Yeah, good night. Thanks. The phone went dead. I looked at it, wondering. Then I switched it off. I draped the towel over the side of the bath, unlocked the door, and returned to the bedroom, feeling my way across the unfamiliar space to the bed. What was that? A deep, sleepy voice said. Nothing, I said, slipping between the sheets. Wrong number. Chapter 1. My name is Catherine Tellman. I'm a senior executive officer, 3rd level, counting from the top, in a commercial organization which has had many different names through the ages, but which these days we usually just refer to as the business. There's a lot to tell about this particular concern, but I'm going to have to ask you to be tolerant here, because I'm intending to take things slowly and furnish further details of this ancient, honorable, and, to you no doubt, surprisingly ubiquitous concern in due course, as they become relevant. For the record, I am 1.7 meters tall, I weigh 55 kilos, I'm 38 years old, I have dual British-US nationality, I am blonde by birth, not bottle, unwed, and have been an employee of the business since I left school. Early November 1998, in the city of Glasgow, Scotland. Mrs. Todd, the housekeeper, cleared away my breakfast things and padded silently away across the pine floor. CNN babbled quietly from the television. I dabbed at my lips with a crisply starched napkin and gazed out through the tall windows and the light rain to the buildings on the far side of the Grey River. The company apartments in Glasgow had been shifted a few years earlier from Blytheswood Square to the newly fashionable Merchant City area on the north bank of the Clyde. This building had been in company ownership since we built it in the late 1700s. It was a warehouse for nearly 2 centuries, was leased out as a cheap clothing store for a decade, then it lay unused for a number of years. It was renovated in the 80s to create office and retail units on the ground and first floor, and loft-style apartments on the 3 remaining floors. This, the top floor, was all business. Mrs. Todd glided back to complete the tidying of the table. "Will there be anything else, Miss Tellman?" "No, thank you, Mrs. Todd." "The car's here." "I'll be 10 minutes. I'll let them know." My watch and mobile agreed that it was 0920. I rang Mike Daniels. "Yes?" "Ah." "Yes. Ah, indeed." They couldn't find you a dentist? They found me a dentist, but there wasn't time to do anything. I still look like a fucking footballer. Pity. Sounds like you're in a car. I take it you're on your way to Heathrow. Yes, everything's on schedule. Any pain? A little. Did you call security? Yes. And Adrian G. They were even less help than you. I don't think Adrian George likes me. He's calling Tokyo and PS's office to let them know, so it won't come as a shock. Very considerate. He said security would want to talk to me when I get back. Anyway, they're going to investigate. Had to hand my flat keys over to some flunky before I left this morning. Oh, who's Walker? Walker? Something to do with security. Colin Walker? That's him. Adrian G. said he thought he'd seen him in the Whitehall office a couple of days ago. Seemed to find it most amusing that he might be doing the investigating. I doubt that. Walker's one of Hazelton's people. He's his chief of security. Well, more enforcement in reality. Enforcement? Oh, shit. Is this some department I haven't heard of? Something not for us level 4s? No. Officially, Walker's security. It's just he's usually regarded as Hazelton's muscle. Muscle? You mean like some sort of fucking henchman? Henchman's a bit 50s B-movie-ish, don't you think? But I believe you could call him a person of hench. If we had hitmen, he'd be one. In fact, he'd probably be their boss. I know a little more about this sort of thing than most execs at my level, because I started out in security. That was before an interest in gadgets, technology, and future trends got me angled across the company's career tracks and on to the plutocratic main line. Maintaining contacts in security may well prove to be one of the more astute investments I've made in my own future. Hazelton? Shit! Is he as scary as everybody says? Not normally, but Walker is. I wonder what he's doing in the country. I heard a rumor there was some sort of meeting next week in Yorkshire. Really? Yes. Something to do with the Pacific thing. Maybe he's here for that. Maybe Hazelton's coming over from the States. Advanced guard. Checking out the grim old pile before Hazelton sows. So, is there a meeting, Kate? Where did you hear this rumor? Is there a meeting? Where did you hear this rumor? I asked first. What? Oh, come on. Is there some high-level meeting or not? I'm sorry, I couldn't possibly comment. Shit! Does that mean you're attending? Michael, you ought really to be concerning yourself with your own assignment. Ha! I'm trying to take my mind off it. Anyway, I have to go. There's a car waiting for me. Have a safe and productive trip. Yeah, all that stuff. I was on sabbatical. One of the privileges that comes with my rank is that I'm allowed 1 year in every 7, on full pay, to do just as I please. This has been a business institution for those at my level and above for about 2.5 centuries, and seems to be working well. We'll probably keep it. Certainly I had no complaints, even though I hadn't taken what most people would regard as full advantage of such a serious perk. Nominally, and for tax purposes, I was based in the States. I spent about 1/3 of the year traveling, generally in the developed world. I was still enjoying this largely airborne lifestyle, but when I did want to feel the earth under my feet, I could always retreat to the modest but comfortable cabin I owned in the Santa Cruz Mountains, just outside the town of Woodside, California, within easy reach of Stanford, Palo Alto, and the rest of Silicon Valley. That's modest and cabin in the Californian opulent sense, with a pool, hot tub, 5 bedrooms, and a 4-car garage. If home is the place that best displays your character, then this was my home. From the stuff on the shelves, you could have told that I liked German composers, realist art, French films, and biographies of scientists. Also that I was addicted to technical journals. My European base was Suzerain House, the company's monolithic warren of offices and apartments overlooking the Thames at Whitehall, which I prefer to our Swiss base at Chateau d'Ay. I suppose Suzerain House was my second home, though in terms of architectural coziness, that's a bit like regarding the Kremlin or the Pentagon as a pied-à-terre. Never mind. My job, wherever I might be, was to keep abreast of current and incipient technological developments, with the brief of recommending which of those technologies the business ought to invest in. I'd been doing this for a while. It was, I am pleased to say, on my advice that we bought into Microsoft on its initial flotation back in the 80s, and into the Internet server companies at the start of the 90s. And while many of the other computer and associated high-tech companies we've put money into have gone quite spectacularly bust, a few of our investments in the computer and IT industries had produced returns sensational enough to make the whole investment program one of our most worthwhile. In recent history, only the portfolios we developed in steel and petroleum during the late 1800s have yielded greater rewards. My reputation in the company was, if I may toot my own tuba a tad, at least very secure, and possibly, whisper it, even verging on legendary. And believe me, we have a generous stock of living legends in the business. I had achieved level 3 status 10 or 15 years earlier than I might have hoped for, even as a high flyer, and, while it depended on the goodwill of my co-workers, I was fairly confident that sometime in the next few years I would be promoted to level 2. A close inspection of my own personal mammon graph would reveal even to the untrained eye that my remuneration package, including commission multipliers gained as a result of my successful forecasts regarding computers and the Internet, was already more generous than that of many of our level 2 executives. It had occurred to me a couple of years earlier that I was probably what the average person would consider independently wealthy. In other words, that I could have existed comfortably without my job, though, of course, as a good businesswoman, that was all but unthinkable for me. Anyway, you can't rest on your laurels. These successes with computer software and communications, lucky guesses if you wanted to be uncharitable, were all in the past, and I still had a job to do. And so it was that at that moment I had high hopes for our recently taken-up stakes in fuel cell technology, and had been lobbying hard for more investment in private space concerns. We'd see. The Lexus hummed its way through the mirror-wet streets of Glasgow, heading east. People hunched against the buffeting windrush of rain. Some carried umbrellas, others held folded tabloids or flapping carrier bags over their heads as they waited at pedestrian crossings. I checked my laptop for email, then read the newspapers. My chauffeur was called Raymond. Raymond was about half my age, tall and athletic, with short blonde hair. He and I had developed what they used to call an understanding over the week or so I'd been in Glasgow. Raymond was perfectly good behind the wheel, though I confess I preferred him between the sheets, which was where he'd been the night before when Mike Daniels had called. If Mrs. Todd knew from the start that we were involved, she was able to pretend that she didn't, because Raymond had so far always succeeded in waking up in time to slip away before she arrived in the morning. An able, if occasionally overly energetic lover at night, Raymond was the soul of driving professionalism and formal politeness during the day. When I was Raymond's age, this sort of compartmentalization of roles and relationships would have struck me as hypocritical, even deceitful. Now, however, it seemed quite the most convenient, even honest way to behave. Raymond and I could be prim and correct with each other while he performed his driverly duties, and as carnally abandoned as we desired when he took off his peaked cap and set his grey uniform aside. In fact, I rather enjoyed the contrast. It lent a certain anticipatory frisson to the mundane condition of being taken from one place to another. Miss Tellman." "Yes, Raymond." "Some bad traffic up ahead," he said. He glanced at the car's navigation screen. "Take a different route, eh?" "Okay." Raymond whirled the steering wheel to send us down a side road leading to the river. Raymond took this sort of thing seriously. Personally, I've no interest in my route to a given destination, but some people like to be told why they're going one way rather than the other. I scanned the newspapers. Midterm elections in the States. Dow up. British Chancellor makes an announcement today about extra government borrowing. Interest rate cut expected later today. FTSE up, pound down. Death and destruction in Central America, caused by the remains of Hurricane Mitch. Thousands buried under mudslides. Part of my mind scanned a mental list of company assets in the area, wondering how we might be affected, while my conscience shook its metaphorical head and tried to dredge up some human sympathy for the victims from the depths of my corporate soul. I could have logged on to the company website and found out what exposure we had in Guatemala, Nicaragua, and Honduras, and if our web people were on the ball, what damage we'd taken down there. But I preferred to finish reading the papers first. General Pinochet's appeal against his extradition to Spain was due to come up in the House of Lords that week. This was of more than academic interest for us as a company. Frankly, the fate of one old fascist mass murderer was irrelevant in business terms, though I don't doubt that as a company we kept on good terms with whoever was in charge in Chile throughout the Allende years, Pinochet's regime, and subsequently. But the whole issue of diplomatic immunity was the one that exercised us at that point. Hence what Mike Daniels referred to as the Pacific thing. Personally, I thought the Pacific thing was all a monumental irrelevance, but it was out of my hands, and I was probably not invited to the rumoured shindig in Yorkshire that weekend, no matter what Mike might think. That was level 1 stuff, the preserve of the Hazeltons and the Parfit Solomonides of the business. The chip factory lay a few miles outside Glasgow, near the town of Motherwell. Standard low-level landscaping of clipped grass, ornamental water features, and a scattering of thin trees, their leaves mostly gone to the autumn winds. They bent in the rain-heavy wind as the Lexus rolled up to the main entrance of the vast ochre shed that was Silex Systems' principal manufacturing facility. Raymond jumped out and was there with a golf umbrella, opening the door. Mr. Ricks, the plant manager, and Henderson, his deputy, were waiting in the foyer. "What happens to the chips that fail?" "They're thrown away." "You can't recycle them?" "In theory, you could, but it would add a lot of cost. By the time they're at this stage, they're already so materially complicated it would take a fortune to start reducing them to their individual constituents." I was standing with Mr. Ricks and Mr. Henderson in one of the cleanest places on earth. I was wearing something not far off a spacesuit. The closest I'd seen to it were the shiny things they wear in those rather forced, "Hey, we're cool, really, Intel ads for Pentium processors." The suit was loose and quite comfortable, as it would have to be if you were to spend an entire working day in it, with a full face mask incorporated into the helmet. Breathing seemed easy enough, though apparently I was doing it through a submicron filter. The suit's slipper-like shoes were built into the bottom of the legs, so that it felt a little like being a small child again, wearing pyjamas. When I changed into the one-piece, out of my white silk blouse and Moschino skirt and jacket, I felt a moment of regret at even temporarily giving up my clothes, until it occurred to me that the suit I was putting on was probably much more expensive than the one I was taking off. We were deep in the giant factory, in a sterile room at the center of 3 concentric levels of antiseptic cleanliness. I was looking through a glass screen at a complex and gleaming machine, which was depositing CD-sized wafers on a platter, spinning them, and then plopping liquid onto the center so that it flowed, apparently instantly, to cover the whole shining surface. Then a metallic arm quickly flipped the wafer over and into another part of the machine. Around us, More space-suited workers were gliding across the high polish of the tiles, pushing tall carts of wafers, or sat hunched over microscopes on workbenches, or staring at computer screens, the text and graphics reflecting off their face masks, while their hands pushed mice round, or gloved fingers fluttered over quietly rattling keyboards. The air transmitted a whole choir of subtle humming, whining noises to my shielded ears, and smelled a little like a hospital's, except cleaner. Everywhere under the high, bright lights, surfaces glittered and sparkled. Even without knowing the breathtaking scale of the investment a plant like this required, you could have smelt the money here. "I hope you can stay for lunch, Miss Tillman," Mr. Ricks said. "Just the usual canteen grub for us normally, of course, but we could go further afield if you like. Can we tempt you?" Mr. Ricks was a big man, a head taller than me, and wide. His jowly face gleamed behind his mask, smiling from the eyes down. I felt quite cool in the air-conditioned, variously filtered atmosphere, but Mr. Ricks seemed to be sweating. Perhaps he was claustrophobic. "Thank you, I'd be delighted. The canteen will be fine." "Do you often take these sabbaticals as a sort of busman's holiday, Miss Tillman?" asked his deputy. "This is my first sabbatical, Mr. Henderson," I told him. "Haven't had time to establish a pattern." Henderson was about my height, stockier. I started walking towards one of the parts of the clean environment we hadn't visited yet. The two men jockeyed for position between the workbenches and the humming machines. A robot delivery unit on a collision course sensed us approaching and glided to a stop until we passed by. "I think if I had a year off, I'd find somewhere better than Motherwell to spend it." He laughed, and he and Ricks exchanged glances. "It is a sabbatical, Mr. Henderson, not a holiday." "Oh, of course, of course." "However, I did spend a month on a yacht in the Caribbean at the start of the year, without my phone or a laptop. That got me nicely wound down," I told them, smiling broadly behind the mask. "Since then, I've been taking the occasional little holiday to let me think. And I've travelled round a lot of the company sites I'd wanted to see but never got round to. Plus, I've spent quite a while in the Library of Congress and the British Library." "Ah," Mr. Henderson said. "It's just that I thought you must have seen the inside of a chip plant before, that's all." "One or two," I agreed. Mr. Henderson was right to be surprised. In fact, he was right to be suspicious, if that was what he was. Despite the impression I'd been careful to give, this was not at all a casual visit. I stopped outside a swipe card-protected door in a tall blank wall and nodded. "Where does this go?" I asked. "This is an area where we've got the workmen in at the moment," Mr. Ricks said, waving at the door. "Installing a new finishing line. Can't actually go through right at this moment in time. Too much dust and that sort of thing, you know. Plus, they're test-loading some of the etching chemicals today, I think, aren't they, Bill?" Henderson said. Ricks said, taking a comic sort of step away from the door. "I think we'll keep well away from that stuff, eh?" They both laughed. In the safety briefing, before we donned our spacesuits, as well as being told what to do in the event of a fire, where to run for a dousing if something acidic splashed on us, we'd been warned about various chemicals with very long names which are used in the chip production process. They could allegedly sneak through the tiniest hole in a glove, soak instantly and unnoticed through the skin, and get straight to work, rotting your bones from the inside, before going on to perform even more insidious horrors on your vital organs. "Well," said Mr. Henderson. The two men started to pull away from the door. Mr. Ricks put an arm out as though to shepherd me away. I crossed my arms. "What's the likely life of the plant?" "Oh, well, with the new lines in place," Mr. Ricks began, but I didn't pay very much attention after that. I had what you might call half an ear for his tone of voice, and I was listening for certain key words. But what I was really interested in was Mr. Ricks's and Mr. Henderson's body language, their whole demeanour. And all I could think of was, these guys are trying to hide something. They were frightened of me, which does, I confess, give me a buzz, but it went beyond the usual nervousness of local bosses, used to total deference, having to answer to somebody from higher up in the organization who's come to pay a short-notice visit. There was something else. Maybe they're both closet misogynists, I thought. Perhaps their habituated reactions to women were derisory or even coercive. I'd looked at the files on this place. There was a slightly higher than average rate of staff turnover, especially amongst female workers. And there'd been a few more complaints that had ended at industrial tribunals than one might have expected. But somehow that didn't feel like it would account for the edgy vibe I was getting here. Of course, it could be me. I could be wrong. Always check the equipment for sensor error first. I don't know whether I'd have dismissed the feeling in the end or not. I'd probably have decided they had some lucrative little scam going that could have got them cashiered, but not something it was worth my while bothering with, given that the plant's figures looked pretty good in general. But something happened that made me think about it all later. A space-suited woman came into view down an aisle. I could tell her gender from her gait as much as her shape. She seemed distracted, struggling to carry a laptop, a plastic-wrapped metal briefcase, a thick, glossy-covered manual, and heavy, straggling cables. I saw her first. Then Henderson looked round, casually back at me, and then quickly at her again. He started towards her, then glanced back at Rix, whose voice faltered momentarily before continuing. The woman was fishing in a pocket of the spacesuit for something as she approached us, while Henderson strode to meet her. Just before he got to her, she pulled out a swipe card on the end of a little metal chain. Then Henderson intercepted her, one arm out as he nodded back in the direction she'd come from. Her head came up as she noticed him for the first time. Mr. Rix's arm extended again, and touching my right shoulder, gently but firmly pulled me round and away, while his other hand waved through the air, and he said, with just a little too much hearty bluster, "While yet before they turn it into a battery chicken shed, eh?" He clapped his gloved hands together. "Well now, cup of tea?" I smiled up at him. What a good idea. I had Raymond take us on a detour on the way back, to a nondescript field by what had once been a main road near Coatbridge. "Come here, small girl." "Whit?" "I said come here." "Whit for?" "What? What did you say?" "Eh?" "Are you actually talking English, child?" "I'm no English. I'm Scottish." "Ah, well, at least I understood that. I wasn't questioning your nationality, young lady. I was merely wondering aloud whether we shared the same language." "Whit?" "Never mind. Look, would you kindly step closer to the car? I hate having to raise my voice. I'm not going to bite you, child." "Who's he?" "That is Gerald, my chauffeur. Say hello, Gerald." "Aye, aye. You all right, Iain?" "Aye. Is that him fixing the tyre, eh, missus?" "Yes, we had a puncture. He's changing the wheel." "Oh, aye." "How are we doing there, Gerald?" "Getting there, ma'am, getting there." "Now, what is your name?" "I'm no supposed to talk to strangers. My mot helped me." "Gerald, introduce us." "What's that, ma'am?" "Introduce us, please, dear boy, as best you can." Mrs. Tellman, this is, the bairn you're talking to. Bairn, this is Mrs. Tellman." "Oh, aye." There, we've been introduced. I'm not a stranger anymore. Now, what is your name? Close your mouth, child, it's unbecoming. What is your name? "My ma says—" "Please, miss, her name's Katie McGurk." "Oh, hello." "Bobby Clark, you're just a wee clipe, so you are." "Least I've got a da." "I wouldn't want a da like yours. He's just a waster." "Ah, still, but," At least I've got one. More'n you have. Just you fuck off, you wee four-eyed cunt. You're a wee cow. I'm telling my mum you said that. Katie? What? Here. What's that? It's a handkerchief. Go on, take it. No, thanks. I see. I take it that young man was Bobby Clark? Aye, wee shite. Kate, I confess I'm genuinely shocked. I didn't know children your age used the sort of language you did. Exactly how old are you, Kate? 8.5. Dear God. How old are you, then? My, you do recover quickly. You're very impertinent, too. Gerald, cover your ears. My hands are a bit mucky, ma'am, but I shall endeavour to keep my legs averted. How gallant. I am 48, Kate. God, that's dead old, is it no? My grand's no that old. Thank you for your thoughts on the matter, Kate. Actually, it's not terribly old at all, and I don't think I've ever felt better about my life. However, what exactly are you and your young friends doing over there? Missus, we're having Olympic Games. Are you indeed? And I thought it was just a bunch of little kids playing on a bit of muddy waste ground in the drizzle. What sports are you playing? Oh, loads. Jumping and running and that. And what are you playing, Kate? I know. I'm selling the sweeties and stuff. Is that what you have in your bag? It's Mama's. It's old, but she said I could have it. I didn't nick it or anything. I repaired the handle myself, see? I see. So you're running the refreshment concession, are you? What? Never mind. May I buy one of your sweets? Aye. I've no many left, but there's nae fizz. No fizz? Aye. Nae iron brew or American cream soda. I've finished both bottles. Just a sweet will do, then. What do you want? Of penny dainties and blackjacks? Oh, there's a few wee lucky bag sweeties left. I'll have a penny dainty, please. That's a penny halfpenny. How much? A penny halfpenny. A penny and a halfpenny? Aye. For a penny dainty? That's the price. But that's a 50% markup on the normal retail charge. Aye, still, but that's the price. So you said. Rather steep, though, isn't it? Aye, but that's the price. Do you want it or no? Gerald, do you have any change? Aye, ma'am. Hold on. I've got a threepenny bit. That no use, ma'am. Thank you, Gerald. Would you like a sweet? Thanks, ma'am. Aye, wouldn't you mind? Tell you what, Kate. I'll give you twopence halfpenny for 2 penny dainties. How's that? Nut. Why not? 2's threepence. But I'm buying in bulk, relatively. I'm looking for a discount. What? Who's that? Didn't you get a discount for buying in bulk when you bought your stock? Missus, I got these at the machine at the bus station. Ah, so you paid full retail. Still, that's your problem. My offer stands. Twopence halfpenny for 2. Nut. Kate, your little friends look like they're finishing their games. You might not sell much more. You could be left with unsold stock. It's a good offer. Here, take the threepence. Then you give me 2 penny dainties and a halfpenny change. Nut. 2 cost threepence. One can be too stubborn in the retail business, Kate. Flexibility is what carries a concern through changing circumstances. What? The rain's getting heavier, Kate. I'm sitting here in the dry. You're getting soaked, and your pals are leaving. 2 for twopence halfpenny. Nut. You're being pig-headed, Kate. Maintaining or adjusting your margins should be a matter of practical calculation, not pride. I know. Give us the threepence, and I'll give you the 2 penny dainties, and I'll give you a blackjack as well. They're usually 2 for a penny halfpenny, or 3 for twopence. Getting rid of more stock. Very sensible. Okay, it's a deal. There you are. Thank you. Gerald? Ma'am? Catch. Thanks. Here, Kate. You have the blackjack back. I think it might stain my teeth. Now what? My ma says never take sweeties for strangers. Kate, don't be ridiculous. You just sold me this. However, your mother is quite right, I suppose. If you don't want it.
Now, okay then. Ta.
My, you were hungry.
Aye. No much eating in one of those.
How's it going, Gerald? Nearly there, Mum. Just doing up the nuts. Be back on the road in 5 minutes. Fine. Do you do this often, Kate?
Wait, selling stuff?
Yes.
Never done it before. Want to know a secret?
What was that? A secret?
Aye. Promise you'll no tell anybody but...
I promise.
Cross your heart and hope to die.
Absolutely.
I got the money from my Uncle Jimmy. He let me play with pennies.
Oh, really?
Aye, they're Irish pennies, 'cause he'd been to Ireland on his boat.
Irish pennies?
Aye, they're the same shape as yours and that, except they've got harps on them. But the machine doing the bus station takes them fine.
And your uncle just gave you these? You didn't have to pay for them?
Nut, he just gave us them.
Huh! So you didn't pay full retail at all? Every penny you made was clear profit. You little rogue. Did you hear that, Gerald? I'm shocked and appalled, ma'am. Enterprising ween, though.
Aye, but no for everything. I had to pay my own money for some of the sweeties, and the bottles of fizz I had to pretend I was getting for my ma. I still got to take florins back to her.
And how much were you charging for the pop?
Penny a cup.
Those your mum's teacups?
Aye, missus. We'll no need them till tonight.
I see. Oh, hello. Who's this, Kate?
This is Simon.
How do you do, Simon?
Hello, miss. Katie, it's awfully wet. I want to go home.
Is that okay? You coming?
Aye. Here's the penny dainty. Do you want some lucky bag sweeties and all? Oh, aye. I'll give you them when I get home, okay? Oh, aye, that's great. Thanks, Katie. Can we go now, though, but I'm soaking. I fell in the water jump.
Aha. Let me guess. Simon here is your security.
Nut, he's making sure none of these wee shites nick my money.
Same thing, Katie. I'm sure you won't accept a lift from a stranger, but could you tell me where you live? I'd like to talk to your mother.
Missus, you said you wouldn't say anything. God'll get you for crossing your heart and hoping to die. You'll die, so you will. Aye, I'm no fucking kidding.
Kate, calm down. I'm not going to say anything about the nature of your capital, about the pennies you used down at the bus station. I swore I wouldn't, and I won't.
Aye, well, you better know.
Kate, is your mother very young? I take it your father's not around, is that right? That's a nice wee dress, but it's a bit thin for this weather. Too small for you. You look hungry and too small for your age. Do you go to school every day? Are you doing well there?
I'm going home.
Ready to roll, Mum. Thanks, Gerald. Just a minute. Kate, turn round. I'm serious. This is serious. Do you want to stay here for the rest of your life? Well, do you? Kate, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Hairdresser.
Do you think you'll get to be one?
Maybe.
Kate, do you know of all the other things you could be?
My pal Gail wants to be a air hostess.
Mon, Katie, I'm freezing. There's nothing wrong with being a hairdresser or an air stewardess, Kate. But I think there might be a lot of other things you could be if you wanted, if you knew. Let me talk to your mother. May I talk to her?
Katie, I'm fucking freezing, so I am. Missus, you're no bad woman, are you?
No, Kate. I'm not a saint, and I've used my share of Irish pennies in my past, but I'm not a bad woman. Am I a bad woman, Gerald, would you say? Certainly not, Mum. Always been very nice to me.
Katie, man, it's fucking brass monkeys out here, so it is. You could give us a lift, then. Is that okay, aye?
Really? Well, yes.
Aye. Come on, Simon. We're getting a ride home in this woman's big car. Wipe your feet.
Eh? And that is how I met Mrs. Elizabeth Tellman, a Level 2 executive in the business, one rainy Saturday afternoon in the autumn of 1968, outside Coatbridge, to the west of Glasgow. Mrs. Tellman was one of those people who always seemed about 6 inches taller than she really was, to me. Even now, when I think of her, she appears in my memory as a tall, elegant woman, as lithe and slim as my mother was wee and dumpy. Yet the two were within a couple of inches of each other in height, and not really that different in build. I suppose Mrs. Tellman just held herself straighter. She had long raven hair, which she only stopped dyeing gradually in her 70s. My mother was mousy brown, though I inherited hair somewhere between fair and blonde, apparently from my maternal grandmother. Mrs. Tellman had a wide mouth and long fingers, and an accent that sometimes sounded American, sometimes English, and sometimes something else entirely, something tantalizingly foreign and exotic. There was a Mr. Tellman, but he lived in America. The two had been estranged since barely a year after their marriage. Mrs. Tellman had Gerald drop Simon at his house, and then took me to the local shop, where I bought my 2 replacement bottles of fizz. We arrived at my house just as my mother was staggering up the path with her carry-out, fresh, if that's the word, from the pub. I think Mrs. Tellman decided she wasn't going to get much sense out of Mother right then, so arranged to return the following morning. My mother threatened to slap me for talking to a stranger. That night, very drunk, she cuddled me to her, her breath sweet with the smell of fortified wine. I tried not to squirm, and to appreciate this unusually drawn-out burst of physical affection, but I couldn't help thinking of the rich, subtle, beguiling odors in Mrs. Tellman's car, some of which seemed to come from the car itself, and some from her. She reappeared to my surprise the next morning, before my mother was up. Once my mother was dressed, we went for a drive. I was given a Milky Way, and got to sit up front with Gerald, which was good. But I couldn't hear what was going on in the back because of the glass partition, which was annoying. Gerald kept me entertained by telling me what he thought the other drivers were saying and thinking, and letting me work the indicator switch on the dashboard. Meanwhile, my mother and Mrs. Tellman sat in the back, swapping my mother's Woodbines and Mrs. Tellman's Sobranis and talking. That night, I got to sleep with my mother for the first time in years, all the way through to the morning. I was hugged even more fiercely, and I puzzled over her hot tears. The next morning, Gerald picked my mother and me up and took us through to Edinburgh, to Mrs. Tellman's huge, grand red sandstone hotel at the end of Princess Street. Mrs. Tellman wasn't there herself. She was off doing something important somewhere else in the city. We went to a big room where, to my consternation and my mother's embarrassment, I was washed again by a large lady dressed like a nurse, given a medical inspection, and then measured and dressed in a scratchy shirt, skirt, and jacket that were the first entirely new clothes I'd ever worn. Part of my horror at all this was because I thought we were in a public room where anybody might walk in and see me in my knickers. I didn't realize that these rooms were Mrs. Tellman's, and that we were in her suite. I was taken to another room, where a man gave me lots of sums and other tasks to do. Some were purely arithmetical, some were questions about lists, some consisted of looking at little diagrams, and then looking at others, and deciding which one fitted with the first lot, and some were more like little stories I had to complete. They were fun. I was left alone with a comic while the man went away. Mrs. Tellman came and took us to lunch in the hotel. She seemed very happy to see me, and she kissed my mother on both cheeks, which made me jealous, though I wasn't sure of whom. Over lunch, while my mother and I swapped conspiratorial looks as we tried to work out which cutlery to use, I was asked if I wanted to go to a special school. I recall being horrified. I thought special schools were where bad boys were sent for thieving and vandalizing. But after this was cleared up, and I was assured I would get to go home of an evening, I agreed, tentatively. I started at Miss Stutsley's school for girls in Rutherglen the next day. I was a year behind the others, but physically no bigger than any of my classmates, and shorter than several of them. I was picked on for 3/4 of that first day, until I sent a girl home with a broken nose following a fight during afternoon playtime. I was almost thrown out, and had to sit patiently through several stern talkings, too. A tutor came to our house in the evenings to give me extra lessons. Mrs. Tellman found my mother a job in an office machine factory in Steps, the same factory Mrs. Tellman had been on her way to inspect when her car had picked up a puncture. We ate better. We had proper furniture, a phone, and soon a colour television. I found I had a lot fewer uncles than I'd thought I had, and Mother stopped walking into doors. When I left Miss Stuteley's and entered Kessington Academy in Bearsden, we moved from our terrace in Coatbridge to a semi in Jordan Hill. My mother was now at another factory, helping to make things called computers, not adding machines. She never married, but we went on holidays with a nice man called Mr. Bullwood. Mrs. Tellman came to visit us every few months, and always brought book tokens for me, and record tokens, clothes, and little things for my mother. My mother died suddenly at Easter 1972, while I was on a school holiday in Italy. We'd taken buses, ferries, and trains to get to Rome, but I flew back alone. Mrs. Tellman and Mr. Bullwood met me at Glasgow Airport and took me in Mrs. Tellman's car, still driven by Gerald, straight to the cemetery in Coatbridge. It was a warm, sunny day. I remember watching her coffin disappearing behind the curtains at the crematorium, feeling worried that I couldn't seem to cry. A smallish man with shaking hands, wearing a shiny and badly fitting suit with a black armband up by one shoulder, came to me afterwards and breathed whiskey over me, telling me with tears in his rheumy red eyes that he was my father. Mrs. Tellman put an arm round my shoulder, and I let myself be guided away. The man shouted things at us. Everything changed again. I was sent to board at an international school in Switzerland, run by the firm Mrs. Tellman worked for. I was miserable there, but no more than I'd been in the months between my mother dying and completing the term at Kessington Academy. I studied for my baccalaureate and found a keen, solitary release in skiing and skating. I was surrounded mostly by forbiddingly bright girls from families which seemed to possess infinitely deep reserves of money, taste, and talent, and glamorous idiots with braying laughs who were destined to go straight to finishing schools and who had no ambitions beyond a rich marriage. I finished with a flourish and several academic prizes. Brasenose College, Oxford, awaited. Mrs. Tellman adopted me, and I took her name. I cried for both of them when she died last year. The phone rang for a long time, well past the number of rings you'd normally allow, before concluding that there was nobody present to answer it. Finally, "Who is this?" The voice, rich, sibilant, and velvety, was that of an elderly man who was rather angry, the voice of a man answering a phone that rarely rang, and which, when it did, was equipped to tell him the number that was ringing him, and from its memory also tell him to whom that number belonged. A phone which he expected to bring only important information. "Hello, it's me." "Kate? Is that you, dear girl?" "Yes, I'm using a call box." "Ah, I see." A pause. "Does that mean that I was right, and you've discovered something interesting?" "Possibly." "Where are you?" "Near where I've been all week." "I see. Would it be best to meet up?" "I think it would." "Perfect, perfect. This weekend's definitely on. Can you still make it?" "Of course." My heart, I have to say, leapt. Uncle Freddie had told me a couple of weeks earlier that there might be a high-level meeting and general hoo-ha, to use his term, this coming weekend, and that I might be invited. But I hadn't liked to take this for granted. My contingency plans had consisted of surprising Raymond and spiriting him away for a couple of nights. I would do all the driving. We'd go somewhere discreet and expensive with a log fire, and I'd feed us both lots of vintage champagne. But that would have to be put on hold. I would be going to Bliss Craig.
Good. Important get-together, Kate. The cherubim and seraphim of our tribe will be in attendance, not to mention more temporal powers.
Yes, there have been rumours.
Have there indeed?
Well, Mike Daniels had wind of something by last night.
Ah, yes, the L4 whose teeth were stolen. What on earth was that all about?
No idea.
Well, the bush telegraph's obviously working. Still, be that as it may, we'll need you here on Friday afternoon. Should all be finished by Sunday, but don't count on it. All right?
All right.
I should tell you your friend Suvinda will be there.
Will he now? Oh, joy.
Yes, still coming.
Uncle Freddie, an invitation to Bliss Craig is something I could never turn down. Oh, dear, my money's running out. I'll be there on Friday. Till then.
Ah, right you are. Jolly good. Bye.
Instant message transmission. What happened to your phone?
The new one doesn't work out here. Can you believe that?
Head should roll. You need another phone. I believe they sell such things there in Tokyo. How did the signing go?
Fine. KR loved his bottle of scotch. Is it really 50 years old?
Yep. P.S. Get there okay?
P.S. Usual retiring self. Apparently the X stands for Xerxes. Last seen escorting several geishas back to his 737 to show them its circular bed. Boy, can that guy talk.
Talking about talking?
Oh, right. KR didn't seem to mind my slight teeth shortfall situation at all. Smiled and bowed throughout. Probably thought it was a total hoot. Toothless gaijin. Recommended dentist. Been there, done that. Now got splendid set of temporary Tokyo teeth. With Teflon.
Well, by gum.
That took you 24 hours?
I've been busy. End of transmission. The origins of what we now call the business predate the Christian Church, but not the Roman Empire, to which it might fairly be said we owe our existence, and which at one point, technically at any rate, we owned. Owning the Roman Empire, even if it was only for a total of 66 days, sounds wonderfully romantic. A real business coup. In fact, we regard it as one of our greatest and most public mistakes, and it taught us a lesson we've never forgotten. Most of the details are available in fairly digestible form in Gibbon's Decline and Fall, where it is recorded in Volume 1, Chapter 5, A.D. 180 to 248, that a wealthy and foolish senator called Didius Julianus purchased the empire at public auction from the Praetorian Guards, who had disposed of the previous ruler, one Pertinax, after he had proved too keen on tackling the empire's various corruptions. He'd lasted 86 days, beating our man by nearly 3 clear weeks. What only we in the business know is that the unfortunate Didius Julianus, who became Emperor Julian when he ascended to the throne, was merely a dupe, the front man for a loose consortium of traders and moneylenders who had inherited a commercial cabal already many generations old. Possibly drunk on their success, certainly unable to decide what to do with it, the squabbling merchants let the reins of power slip from their fingers. 3 generals, in Britain, on the Danube, and in the Eastern Empire, revolted, and limited Emperor Julian's occupation of the imperial throne to a little more than 2 months. When he fell, so did many of those who had supported him. The business had already existed for several centuries by then. To Rome it had brought furs from Scythia, amber from the Baltic, carpets from Babylon, and, in its most intense, risky, and lucrative enterprise, every year secured a host of spices, aromatics, silks, gems, pearls, and manifold other treasures from Arabia, India, and the further east. Sensibly keeping away from direct political power, all taking part had prospered. Estates were purchased, villas built, fleets constructed, herds increased, slaves and works of art bought. With the Didius Julianus fiasco, almost all of that was lost. As I say, it was a lesson we have cleaved to for the best part of 2 millennia, at least until now, arguably with the Pershifixing. Documents, clay tablets mostly, still stored in the closest we have to a world headquarters near Chateau d'Ay in Switzerland, show that most of our original fortune was made in trading, warehousing, and lending money. There appear to have been a few scams, too. Shipwrecks that never happened, camel trains that were robbed by our own people, warehouses that burned down either with or without their contents, depending whether you looked at one set of accounts or another. Enough of that sort of thing generally to make us no better than most, but sufficiently few for us not to have been the worst. Allegedly, we still store a few items which the Catholic Church and the Holy Roman Empire asked us to look after. Sadly, nothing quite as dramatic as the body of Christ or the Holy Grail, but I've heard on good authority that we have in our possession at least one extra book the scholars don't know about, which could well have made it into the Bible. A book of Leonardo cartoons, dozens of Michelangelo's pornographic paintings, various other art treasures, and potentially valuable documents, and several sets of crown jewels. Rumors I've heard indicate that our Swiss bank may be implicated, albeit marginally, in the recent Nazi gold scandal, which, aside from the morality of it all, is both careless and embarrassing, given the occasional cooperative venture we've taken on with the Rothschilds, and the generally good relations we've enjoyed with Jewish enterprises over the centuries. At any rate, one of the reasons that we're able to go quietly about our business as a company without too much intrusion or publicity, adverse or otherwise, is that we have at least a little dirt on almost everybody, whether they are other commercial concerns, sovereign states, or major religions. There are other reasons, but we'll come to those later. All in good time. A resource which, given our longevity, we are obviously well used to working with in bulk. Chapter 2. Well, thanks for the ride. Raymond grinned. It was a pleasure having you in the back, Miss Tillman. He squeezed my hand rather harder than a normal handshake would have called for, then tipped his cap and swung his lithe form back into the Lexus. I permitted myself the briefest of lingering glances and a sigh, then followed the 2 footmen carrying my luggage into the vast symphony in grey stone that was Bliss-Craig House, while the car crunched over the pale stones of the driveway and set off back through the deer-scattered parklands and forests for the main road. "Kate, my girl, good to see you." Dressed in well-worn tweeds, waving a shepherd's crook with the thoughtless abandon of one brought up all his life under extravagantly high ceilings, attended by a brace of gangling wolfhounds, leaving a double trail of whiskery grey hairs and saliva across the parquet, his own white hair seeming to float uncombed round his head, as though in only casual contact with his scalp, Freddie Ferrandonald advanced down the length of the entrance hall, laughing, arms held wide. He was lit from the side by the wintry sunlight pouring through a 2-story-high stained-glass window, depicting a Victorian steelworks, all gaudy reds, splashing oranges and sparkling yellows, with great royals of belching smoke issuing from huge machines, and small hunched human figures barely visible beneath the fumes and sparks. A self-consciously eccentric, dashing English toff of the old school, Uncle Freddy was genuinely an adopted uncle of mine, as he was a stepbrother of Mrs. Tellman's, a familial relationship that he never let stand in the way of sharing with me the odd, toothily leering sexual innuendo, or giving my bum the occasional pat. Still, he was a laugh, and maybe because, like me, he didn't have much in the way of real family, we'd always got on surprisingly well. "Welcome back!" Freddy hugged me as enthusiastically as his thin frame and 80-plus years would allow, then held me at arm's length and looked me down and up. "You're looking as lovely as ever." "As are you, Uncle Freddy." He seemed to find this hilarious, laughing loud enough to raise an echo from the tiered upper galleries of the hall, and exposing a wealth of variously angled and diversely coloured teeth. He put an arm round my shoulder and walked with me towards the distant foothills of the main staircase. Miss Heggis appeared. Miss Heggis was the housekeeper of Bliskregg. She was small but formidable, with grey bunned hair, a steely stare, lips the colour and fullness of a small elastic band, artificial eyebrows, and a voice to etch titanium. She also gave the impression of having a combined transporter room and TARDIS buried somewhere in the house at her command, as she seemed to possess the gift of materializing at will, wherever and whenever she wanted. The only difference was that in Star Trek or Doctor Who there was a cheesy sound effect and a vaguely human-shaped shimmer, or the sudden appearance of a Metropolitan Police box to give you a few seconds' warning. Miss H had perfected the art of arriving instantly and without a sound. "Ah, Miss H," Uncle Freddy called out. "Where's the lovely Kate billeted?" Miss Heggis nodded to the expectant-looking footman with my cases. "Miss Tellman's in the Richmond room," she told them. "Miss Heggis?" I said, with a nod, and what I hoped looked like a respectful smile. "Miss H is the sort of person it pays to keep in with." "Miss Tellman, welcome back." Miss Heggis allowed her head to incline downwards by about a degree, while the corners of her mouth twitched. This was her equivalent of a floor-deep curtsy and a broad but bashful grin. I felt truly honoured. We started up the stairs. I threw open the tall windows and stepped out onto the balcony, hugging myself as I drank in the cold air beneath a clear cobalt sky. My breath smoked in front of me. Beyond the stone balustrade, the view dropped sharply away in a series of sculpted terraces dotted with lawns, flower beds, pools, and waterfalls, to the wooded floor of the valley, where a few loops of river sparkled through the trees before decanting into the broad lake to my right, at the centre of which a single huge fountain towered. On all sides the parkland spread away to the hills and crags beyond. Looking along the cliff edge the house was perched upon, I could see a long structure like the top part of a crane laid along the lawn and jutting out over the drop. Steam drifted over it from behind, its rear obscured by a towered and crenellated wing of the house. I rubbed my upper arms through my jacket and blouse, realizing that I was smiling broadly at the view. This was Bliskregg. It was begun in the early 1800s by the local duke, who was determined to create one of the great houses of England. He was responsible for the huge reservoir created in the hills 5 miles to the north of the house, which, via 2 valley-spanning aqueducts and a network of canals, cisterns, and balancing reservoirs, supplied the water and the pressure for the various water features in the house and grounds, of which the tall fountain in the lake was but the most immediately obvious. The Duke devoted all his time to the construction of the building, but neglected to maintain the fortune that was supposed to pay for it. He duly went bankrupt. The estate was purchased by Hieronymus Cole, an eccentric from a local mill-owning family who had made a second fortune in railways. He judged the already vast and rambling half-built structure to be a decent start, but insufficiently ambitious,
Many more architects, landscape gardeners, hydrologists, engineers, stonemasons, and artists would have to be thrown at the project. By the time Hieronymus had finished, Bliss Craig boasted 300 rooms, 18 towers, 2 miles of cellars, 5 lifts, 30 dumbwaiter shafts, a similar number of laundry delivery elevators disguised as wardrobes, a water-powered funicular linking the house to its own railway branch line, a 600-seat underground theatre with a hydraulically driven revolving stage, numerous fountains, and a mile-long reflecting lake. The place was equipped with a variety of systems for communicating with the staff, plus a pressurized petroleum vapor lighting system powered by an early hydraulic turbine. Hieronymus died before he could move in. His son, Bardolph, spent most of the rest of the family fortune indulging a passion for gambling and aviation. He converted one of the ballrooms into a casino and adapted the reflecting lake, which was handily aligned with the prevailing westerlies, into a landing lake for a seaplane, and near one end of the lake, up a short incline, had installed the world's first land-based steam-powered catapult on the cliff edge to launch the aircraft. It was this structure I could see from the balcony of my room, wreathed in steam. Uncle Freddy had just had it restored to working order. Not content with being able to land his seaplane during the day, Bardolph had devised a system of coal-gas pipes set just beneath the surface of the mile-long lake to release bubbles of methane, which could be ignited during the hours of darkness to provide a flare path for night landings. He died in the fall of 1913, trying to make his first such landing. Apparently the wind blew out half the plumes of burning gas and ignited several piles of leaves at the side of the lake, causing him to fly towards the trees to one side and collide with the top of an ornamental pagoda. He was buried in a coffin that looked like a roulette table, housed within a seaplane-shaped mausoleum on the hillside, looking over the lake and the house. Bliss Craig was used as a convalescent hospital during the Great War. Then it and the estate fell into disrepair as the Cole family struggled to cope with the ruinous costs of upkeep. It was an army training centre during the Second World War. Then the Ministry of Defence sold it to us in 1949. We, too, used it as a training centre. Uncle Freddy bought it from the company in the late 50s and has lived here since the early 60s. The business started the refurbishments, but he completed them. The restoration of the steam catapult and the reflecting lake's underwater lighting system, recently converted to run on North Sea gas, was all his doing. I returned inside and closed the windows. The servants had hung my suit carrier in one of the 2 huge wardrobes and left my other bags on the bed. I looked round, but there was no TV in here. Uncle Freddy thought he was making a huge concession to modern technology by having a special room to watch television in. Bliss Craig had speaking tubes, servant signal wires, pneumatic delivery tubes, a domestic telegraph system, and its own baroquely complicated field telephone-based intercom network. But only a handful of TVs, and they were mostly in the servants' quarters. I'm a news junkie, and normally the first thing I do in a hotel room is switch on the TV and find CNN or Bloomberg. Never mind. I shivered in my clothes just briefly. Here I was in a huge house, stuffed with antiques and swarming with servants, waiting for the vastly rich and powerful to arrive. And it was all entirely familiar to me. I had one of those moments when I reminded myself how fortunate I'd been, how privileged I'd become. As usual, the first thing I unpacked, even before my toiletries bag, was a little Netsuke monkey with a dolorous expression and eyes made from tiny chips of red glass. I placed it on the bedside table. I set the monkey, usually along with my watch and a torch, by my bed, wherever I am in the world, so that I always have something familiar to look at when I first wake up. The sad-faced little figure was one of the first presents I ever bought myself after I left school. Embedded in its base is a 35-year-old pre-decimal coin, the same 12-sided threepenny bit that Mrs. Tillman handed to me from her gleaming black limousine that wet Saturday afternoon in 1968. Uncle Freddy wanted to fish. I dressed in some old jeans, a sensible shirt, and a thick woolly jumper I found in a drawer. The house provided a life jacket-equipped waistcoat with too many pockets and a pair of thigh-length waders. An ancient jeep, driven with geriatric abandon by Uncle Freddy himself, bounced us down a grassy track to a boathouse by the broad lake with the fountain. The pair of wolfhounds bounded after us, scattering spittle to either side as they ran. In the boathouse we picked up 2 old cane rods and the rest of the paraphernalia associated with fly fishing. "Are we likely to catch anything at this time of year?" I asked, as we tramped along the shore, loosely accompanied by the dogs. "Good God, no," Uncle Freddy said, and laughed. We waded into shady shallows not far from where the river met the lake, down an ornamental weir decorated with chubby stone cherubs. "Well, the bastards are up to something," Freddy said, casting far out into the gentle current. I had told him about my visit to Silex Systems, and the odd behaviour of Messrs. Ricks and Henderson concerning the locked door. He glanced at me. "As long as you're sure you're not imagining all this." "I'm sure," I told him. They were both perfectly polite, but I could tell they really didn't want me there. I felt about as welcome as a mole in a bowling green. "Ha!" "I took another look at the plant's figures afterwards," I said, making a reasonable cast myself. "They show some odd fluctuations. They're like an oil painting. The further away you stand, the more convincing they look. But get up close, and you can see all the brush strokes, all the little blobby bits stuck on." "What the hell can they be up to?" Uncle Freddy said, sounding exasperated. "Could they have another production line going in there? Could they be building their own chips and selling them independently?" I thought about that. Finished chips are worth more than their weight in gold, more than industrial diamonds. But I don't see how they could have hidden the capital plant. The raw materials purchases would barely show in petty cash. But the machines, the whole line, they can't have hidden that. "Silex, they're not wholly owned, are they?" I shook my head. "Equal 48% with Ligents US. The other 4% is owned by the employees. Ricks and Henderson are our guys, but via Mr. Hazelton." "Shit," Uncle Freddy said. "Mr. Hazelton is a level 1 executive, a single level above Uncle Freddy, and the highest of the high. One of the all but untouchable principal players of our company, and a full member of the board. He would be showing up later on today with some of the other power players. Uncle Freddy, a frustrated level 1 man if ever there was one, harboured certain resentments concerning Mr. Hazelton." "Do we have a legal route in there?" he asked. "Only through Hazelton," I told him, "or another level 1 intervening." Uncle Freddy snorted derisively. "Otherwise we'd have to wait until the elections next year," I said. "Though we'd have to start campaigning now, and I've no idea who might be plausible replacements." "I'll have to explain about these elections later." "We should just get a chap in there," Uncle Freddy said. "I think so. Want me to talk to somebody?" "Yes, get a fellow from one of the European offices, somebody who knows what they're doing. Scottish, I suppose, but not based there, or London." "I think there's someone in Brussels who might do. If you'll authorize it, I'll see if I can persuade security to put them on secondment." "Right you are. Yes, I think that's the least we should do." Then Uncle Freddy's line, until that point lying in a lazily straightening S-shape across the ruffled waters, jerked suddenly and disappeared under the surface. He looked surprised. "Well, I'll be," he exclaimed, and braked the suddenly spinning reel. "Let's hope that's a good omen," I said. The business has understandings with several states and regimes, and over the centuries we'd carved out our own little territories in various places. We have, for example, a small factory in the U.S. military base on Cuba at Guantanamo, which produces the only authentic Cuban cigars it is more or less legal to sell in the U.S., though they're so exclusive and expensive, and the production legality so ticklish, they're never advertised. Rumor has it that it was one of those which President Clinton... Well, never mind. Usefully close to Guantanamo is the small Bahamanian island of Great Inagua, which is not truly independent, but has its own semi-autonomous parliament. We have interests there, too. On the U.S. mainland, we own a couple of casinos and a few other business ventures in the Res, as it's usually called. Formerly, it's the Wolf Bend Native American Reservation, in a desolate corner of Idaho, where, again conveniently, the full remit of U.S. law does not apply. We're the only non-governmental organization to have a permanent base on Antarctica, in Kronprinsessa Euphemia Land, between Droning Maud Land and Coates Land. Purchased from Argentina during the junta, this is the closest we've come so far to having our own statelet, and has the handy attribute of being both excruciatingly remote and effectively beyond the reach of international law. The more lurid company rumours have characterized Kronprinsessa Euphemia Land as our Siberia, our very own gulag. However, no one I know has ever heard of anybody being sent there against their will, so I reckon it's just a story to help keep people well behaved. A few places have, for an arrangement, for services rendered or just outright bribes, allowed some of our most senior people to become accredited diplomats, hence our interest in the fate of General Pinochet, who was travelling on a supposedly diplomatic passport when he was arrested in London. This seems to be the latest fad with our Level 1 execs. In the past we never used to bother. Perhaps it's simply that when you're so rich you can buy anything. All that's left is stuff that money normally can't buy. My own theory is that one of our Level 1 people bumped into a high-ranking Catholic at a party once and discovered he was talking to a Knight of Malta, accredited through the Vatican to all the best diplomatic courts. Lea Iacocca, for example. This would leave our Level 1 exec at a disadvantage, because only Catholics can become Knights of Malta. And there is a strict rule in the business that all executives, anybody above Level 6, must renounce all religious affiliations, the better to devote themselves to pursuing a life dedicated to mammon. Anyway, some of our Level 1s possess diplomatic passports from some of the world's less savoury regimes, like Iraq and Myanmar, while some sport papers from places so little known that even experienced customs and immigration officers have been known to have to refer to their reference books to find them. Places like Dassa, a trucial state on a small island in the Persian Gulf, or Thulan, a mountainous principality between Sikkim and Bhutan, or the Zoroastrian People's Republic of Inner Magadan, between the Sea of Okhotsk and the Arctic Ocean, or San Borodin, the only independent Canary Isle. These arrangements are useful, but they're expensive and fragile. Regimes change, and if we can buy them now, who might buy them tomorrow? So there's another wheeze on the horizon, a fix for all this. We intend to buy our own state, outright. Quite apart from giving us access to all the diplomatic passports we might reasonably require, and allowing us unrestricted use of that perfect smuggling route called the diplomatic bag, we would also finally have what, according to some of the more enthusiastic Level 1s, we really need: a seat at the United Nations. The candidate is the island of Whenuaua, part of the Society Islands group in the South Pacific. Whenuaua has one inhabited island, 2 mined-out guano outcrops, and no natural resources apart from lots of sun, sand, and salt, and some only arguably edible spiny fish. They were once so desperate to generate income from any source at all, they invited the French to come and blow up nuclear bombs beneath them. But the French refused. They used to have to import water. They now have a desalination plant, but the water still tastes, apparently, on the salty side. Their power plant works only intermittently. There is no natural harbour on the main island, barely space for a proper airport, and the reefs make it impossible for cruise ships to call, even if they want to. And as Whenuaua is devoid of natural wonders and possesses no native culture whatsoever, except that based around the removal of the spines from spiny fish, they don't want to. The place's most pressing problem is that there is no ground on Whenuaua higher than 1.5 meters above sea level, and while its reefs protect the main island from waves and the Pacific swell, they will not be able to counter the effects of global warming.
In 50 years' time, if present trends continue, the place will be mostly underwater, and the capital will look like Venice during an Adriatic storm surge. The deal being suggested is that if we'll build them a seawall which will girdle the whole island, the Whenua'uans will let us take control of the entire state. As there are only 3,500 dispirited Whenua'uans, it has proved quite easy to bribe almost all of them. 3 referenda in the last 5 years have backed our plans by a huge majority. This was, though, not proving an easy deal to complete. Various governments had got wind of the transaction and had been quietly trying to block it, offering various amounts of aid, trading credits, and personal financial sweeteners to the Whenua'ua government. The US, the UK, Japan, and France had proved particularly stubborn, and while we hadn't parted with any serious money yet, just a few skiing holidays in Gstaad, a motor cruiser or 2, a couple of apartments in Miami, and a few other expensive gifts, we'd invested a great deal of effort in all this, only to find that every time we thought we were on the brink of closing the deal, the Whenua'ua government came up with another objection, or pointed out that the French had promised to build them an international airport, or the Japanese would finance a better desalination plant, or the US had offered them their own nuclear power station, or the British had suggested they might be able to arrange a visit by Prince Charles. However, according to the rumours I'd been hearing over the last few weeks, perhaps there'd been some resolution of the problem at last, because the meeting at Bliss-Craig had seemingly been set up to bring the whole matter to a head. Pens might well be wielded, hearty handshakes shared, and leather-bound document wallets exchanged, perhaps, I thought as I stood there in my waders watching Uncle Freddy reel in a lively little trout, that very evening. "Ah!" said Uncle Freddy, throwing the car into a corner and twirling the steering wheel until his arms were crossed. The Ferrari went briefly sideways and teetered on the edge of a spin. Come on, old girl," Uncle Freddy muttered. Not to me, but to the car. I clutched my purse to my chest and felt my legs pull up instinctively, squeezing the shiny shopping bags behind my calves and the footwell. We'd continued to head for the hedge for what felt like a few seconds. Then the Daytona seemed to gather itself just at the apex of the corner, and its long red bonnet lifted as we roared on down the resulting straight. Cars were Uncle Freddy's weakness. The old stables at Bliss-Craig contained a collection of exotic automobiles, some of them very fast, that would have shamed most motor museums. We were on our way back from Harrogate, which was about 40 minutes' drive from Bliss-Craig, or half an hour if you drove like Uncle Freddy. He had offered to drive me into town to pick up a new dress for the formal dinner that evening. I had forgotten quite how enthusiastic a driver he could be. We'd been talking, on my part largely to take my mind off the mortal peril Uncle Freddy appeared to be intent on putting us both in, about the Whenua'ua situation, and I'd expressed the cautious hope, as detailed above, that things might be settled tonight. Then Uncle Freddy had said, "Ah," in that particular tone that made my heart seem to sink, while at the same time my curiosity suddenly awoke, sniffing something major. I'd been trying to distract myself from Uncle F's driving by counting the money I'd withdrawn from a couple of cash machines in Harrogate. The developed world divides people neatly into 2 camps. Those who get nervous when they have too much money on them, in case they lose it or get mugged, and those who get nervous when they don't have enough, in case they miss a bargain. I am firmly of the second school, and my lower limit of nervousness seems to be way, way above most people's higher one. I tend to lose a lot in currency conversions charges, but I'm never short of a bob or two. I blame my upbringing. I looked up from my purse at Uncle Freddy. "Ah?" I said. "You bugger," Uncle Freddy said, under his breath, as a tractor blocked the road ahead and a stream of cars coming in the opposite direction prevented him overtaking. He looked at me and smiled. "Suppose you might as well be told now as later," he said. "What?" "We're not really interested in Whenua'ua." I stared at him. I put the cash away, not fully counted. "What?" I said flatly. "It's all a blind, Kate. A distraction." "A distraction?" "Yup." "For what?"
For the real negotiations.
The real negotiations. I felt like an idiot. All I seemed to be able to do was repeat what Uncle Freddy was saying.
Yup,
he said again, throwing the Ferrari into a gap in the traffic and past the tractor.
The place we're really buying is Thulan.
Thulan? This was the tiny Himalayan principality with which we had, I had thought until now, a very limited understanding. Just the usual money for diplomatic passports deal. Uncle Freddy had mentioned the day before on the telephone that Suvinder Dung, the current Prince of Thulan, would be in attendance at Bliss-Craig over the weekend. But I hadn't thought any more about this beyond reconciling myself to an evening of unsubtle flirting and increasingly outrageous offers of jewels and royal yaks if I'd leave my door unlocked that night.
Thulan,
Uncle Freddy said.
We're buying Thulan. That's how we get our seat at the UN.
And Whenua?
Oh, that's only ever been to throw the other seats off the scent.
At this point, I'd better make clear that during the last decade or so, when the idea of buying our own country and securing our own place at the UN had been gaining popularity amongst the high-ups, we seemed to have started referring to sovereign states as seats. What, right from the start?
Oh, yes,
Uncle Freddy said airily.
While we got quietly on with negotiations with the Thulanese, we've been paying a chap in the American State Department a handsome sum every month to make sure they keep coming up with new ways of preventing us from buying Whenua. But I mean, whoa!
At this point, Uncle Freddy puffed his cheeks out and lifted both hands from the wheel in a dangerously Italianate gesture.
Who'd really want Whenua?
I thought the actual place was irrelevant. I thought it was the seat of the UN that mattered.
Yes, but if you're going to buy somewhere, you might as well buy somewhere decent, don't you think?
Decent? Thulan's a dump. I've been there. They've so little flat land their single landing strip has to double up as their football park. The time I went, we nearly crashed on our first attempt because they'd forgotten to remove one of the goalposts. The Royal Palace is heated by smouldering yak dung, Uncle Freddy. Well, bits had been. The national sport is immigration.
Ah, but it's very high, you see. No danger from global warming there, oh no. Also very survivable in the event of a meteorite strike, or that sort of thing, apparently. And we'll be levelling off one of their mountains to make a proper airport. Plan is to carve out lots of caverns and tunnels and shift a lot of archive stuff there from Switzerland. There's quite a lot of hydroelectric power, they tell me, but we've got a nuclear plant we bought last year from Pakistan, just waiting to be installed. Oh, come on, get out of the bloody way!
This last was addressed to the rear of a caravan, blocking our progress. I sat and thought while Uncle Freddy fretted and fumed. Thulan. Well, why not? I said, the Whenuans will be upset.
They've done very well out of us, and we shan't be making a big fuss about buying Thulan. We can keep the charade going with Whenua until they have their airport or water plant or whatever from one of the other seats.
But in one generation they'll be underwater.
They'll all be able to afford yachts, thanks to us.
I'm sure that will come as a great comfort to them.
Ah, bugger you,
Uncle Freddy muttered, and sent us slingshotting past the caravan. A car approaching flashed its lights at us.
And you,
Uncle Freddy said, before throwing the Ferrari into the fluted entrance to Bliss-Craig's estate.
Excuse my French, he said to me.
Gravel made a noise like hail in the wheel arches as the car fishtailed back and forth before straightening, finding the tarmac that started at the gatehouse and roaring on down the drive. I checked the time difference and then called one of my girlfriends in California. Luce? Kate, how you doing, hon? Oh, fine and dandy. You? Well, as can be expected, given my boss bitch from hell just beat me at squash. How politic of you to let her triumph. I thought your boss was a guy. No, it's Dina Markins. Who? Dina Markins, you know her. You met her at Ming's last New Year, remember? No. The girls' night out?
You remember. We were splitting the check, but they gave it to Penelope Ives because she was sitting at the head of the table, and you said, "Oh, my God, they billed Penny." Ah, that night. Well, her, anyway. Oh, and my cat's in the cat hospital. Oh, dear. What's wrong with Squeamish? Cereal fur balls. That's already more than you want to know, believe me. Are you still in Braveheart territory? They can take our lives, but they'll never take us seriously. Luce, I swear, you must have your own dialogue coach as well as personal fitness trainer. But no, I'm in Yorkshire, England. What? This at the mega house that belongs to your uncle? The same. Any chance your beloved'll be there? There, maybe. Available, I doubt it. What's his name again? Gosh, I don't think I ever told you it. Nah, you didn't, did you? You're so cagey, Kate, so defensive. You should open up more. That's what I keep offering to do for this guy. Slut. Chance would be a fine thing, but never mind. One day your prince will come, kid. Yeah. Funnily enough, tomorrow a real prince does arrive. Guy called Suvinder Dzung. I may have mentioned him. Oh, yeah, the guy who made a pass at you in the scullery. Well, it was the orangerie, but yes, that's my boy. I don't think that's why I've been invited, but I'm still just a little suspicious I've only been invited to keep him entertained. This the Himalayan guy? Well, as in hailing from, not in physical appearance. Yes. So he's a prince of this place? Yes. But I thought he was the ruler. He is. So how come this guy's called a prince if he's the ruler? How come he's not the king? No idea. I guess it's a principality, not a kingdom. No, hold on. Uncle F said it was something about his mother. She's still alive, but he was married briefly, so she's not the queen. But at the same time, he's not the king. Or something. But frankly, who gives a fuck? Not I. Amen. Chapter 3. Over the next few hours, Bliss Craig changed in character and became suddenly very busy. Cars, trucks, and coaches arrived separately and in convoy, thundering up the mile-long slope that was the finishing straight of the driveway. Helicopters touched down briefly to disgorge people onto the pad between the tennis courts and the polo ground, from where the guests, security people, technicians, entertainers, and others were ferried to the house itself by a pair of people carriers. Uncle Freddie was in nominal charge of all this, though, as usual, the people really masterminding everything were those of the business's quaintly entitled Conjurations and Interludens Division, or the Charm Monsters, as they were commonly known within the company. So, up from London was flown one of the most famous chefs in the country, along with his entourage. An extremely annoyed and insistent fly-on-the-wall TV crew from the BBC were only prevented from accompanying him by being physically barred from the helicopter. Arranged through long predated paperwork in a manner that would make it look like a coincidence, a photo shoot with a similarly well-renowned photographer was set up for the weekend, too, by a fashion magazine belonging to one of our wholly owned subsidiaries. This was supposed to make look less sordid the fact that we had a house full of rich and powerful men, none of them accompanied by wives or partners, and a rather large number of stunningly beautiful and allegedly unattached young women, all desperate to make a name for themselves in the world of fashion, modeling, glamour photography, acting, or, well, almost anything. Additional cooks, servants, entertainers, and so on decamped from a series of coaches and minibuses. I spotted Miss Haggis at one point, surveying everything that was going on from a third-floor gallery window. She looked like a proud, solitary old lioness whose territory had just been invaded by about 300 loping hyenas. Our own security people swarmed all over the place, chunkily crew-cut and sober-suited to a man and a woman, most of them in dark glasses, all of them with a little wire connecting one ear and their collar and muttering into concealed lapel mics. You could tell the ones knew enough never to have encountered Bliss Craig before by the sheen of sweat on their foreheads and their look of barely controlled professional horror.
with all its lifts, cellars, walkways, passages, stairways, galleries, dumbwaiters, laundry-handling wardrobe hoists, and complexly interconnecting rooms, securing the house in any meaningful sense was simply impossible. The best they could do was sweep the grounds, be grateful there was never less than a 2-kilometre distance between the high wall that bordered the entire estate and the house itself, and try hard not to get lost. Prince Suvinder Dzung of Thulan arrived from Leeds Bradford Airport by car. 20 years earlier, the prince had lost his wife of a few months in a helicopter crash in the Himalayas, which is why he didn't arrive in one of the machines now. His transport was from Uncle Freddie's collection, a Bucciali Tav 12, which must count as one of the world's more outrageous-looking cars, having a hood, or bonnet, as we'd say here, about the same length as a Mini. Shortly after sending the email to Brussels that would dispatch somebody Freddie and I trusted to Silex in Motherwell, I joined Uncle Freddie on the front steps to greet our guest of honour. "Frederick! Ah, and the lovely Kate. I am so glad to see you both. Kate, as ever, you take my breath away." "Always gratifying to be compared with a blow to the solar plexus, Prince." "Hello, hello, hello!" Uncle Freddie shouted, apparently of the opinion that the Prince had become suddenly deaf and deserved greeting in triplicate. The Prince accepted a hearty handshake from a beaming Uncle Freddie and imposed a prolonged hug upon me before planting a moist kiss on my right middle finger. He fluttered his eyelids at me and smiled. "You are still right-handed, my lovely Miss Tillman?" I pulled my hand away and put it behind my back to wipe it. "In a fight, I'm a southpaw, Prince. How nice to see you again. Welcome back to Bliss Craig." "Thank you. It is like coming home." Suvinder Dzung was a marginally tubby but light-footed fellow of a little more than average height, with glisteningly smooth dark olive skin and a rakish, perfectly black moustache, which matched his glossily waved and exquisitely sculpted hair. Educated at Eton, he spoke without a trace of a subcontinental accent, unless he was profoundly drunk, and when in England, dressed in Savile Row's conservative best. His major affectation, apart from being a bit of a show-off on the dance floor, was his collection of gold rings, which glittered with emeralds, rubies, and diamonds. Come in, old chap," Uncle Freddie said, still apparently addressing a triumvirate of princes, and waving his shepherd's crook so enthusiastically that it nearly felled the prince's private secretary, a small, pale, beady-eyed fellow called B.K. Boussand, who was standing at the prince's side, holding a briefcase. "Oops, sorry, B.K., Uncle Freddie laughed. "This way, Prince, we have your usual suite." "My dearest Kate," Suvinder Dzung said, bowing to me and winking as he turned to go. "See you later, alligator." I laughed. "In a while, Cayman Isler." He looked confused. "Well, thank God we didn't put much money into Russia," Uncle Freddie exclaimed. He passed the port to me and picked up his cigar from the ashtray, pulling on it and rolling the smoke round his mouth. "What a fucking debacle!" "I was under the impression we put quite a lot of money into Russia," Mr. Hazelton said, from the other side of the table, opposite me. He watched as I poured myself a small measure. I had permitted myself a relatively unphallic Guantanamo cigar along with my coffee. The evening's fun was barely begun. We'd been promised the run of the casino later, where we would each be given a stack of chips, plus there would be dancing. So far there'd been no mention of anything as vulgar as our buying Suvinder Dzung's country off him. I handed the port to the prince. There were 8 of us around a small dining table in a modest room set off Bliss Craig's cavernous main dining room. We'd been many more for dinner, our fellow diners having included our titled photographer, a television presenter, a couple of Italian opera singers, 1 soprano, 1 tenor, a French cardinal, a USAF general, a pair of boyish pop stars I'd heard of but didn't recognize, plus an older rock singer I did,
an American conductor, a cabinet minister, a fashionable young black poet, a couple of lords, one duke and two dons, one from Oxford and one from Chicago. After pudding, we had excused ourselves to talk business, taking the prince with us, though, as I say, not much business had actually been talked so far. All this to impress Suvinder. I wondered if we weren't appearing a little desperate. Maybe we were anticipating problems during the negotiating sessions, which would start tomorrow. There were a few of our own junior people present, too, lurking quietly in the background, plus a couple of the prince's servants, and, standing with his feet spread and his hands clasped in the shadows behind his boss, the taut and bulky presence of Mr. Walker, Hazelton's chief of security. "Well, we did," Uncle Freddy told Hazelton, "depending on what you call a lot of money. But the point is, we put in a lot less than most people, and a hell of a lot less than a few. Proportionately, we're ahead when the pain's shared out." "How comforting." Mr. Hazelton was a very tall, very imposing man, with a broad, tanned, slightly pock-marked face under a lot of white hair, which was as millimetrically controlled as Uncle Freddy's was wildly abandoned. He had a deep voice and an accent that seemed to originate somewhere between Kensington and Alabama. When I'd first met him, he sounded like an archetypal smooth English toff, as opposed to Uncle F's batty variety. But like me, he'd lived in the States for the last 10 years or so, and had picked up some of the local intonation. This gave him an accent that was either quite charming or made him sound like an English actor trying to sound like somebody from the Deep South, depending on your prejudices. Hazelton was cradling a crystal bowl of Bunnahabhain in one large walnut hand and pulling on a cigar the size of a stick of dynamite. I've always found it hard to look at level ones like Hazelton without automatically multiplying the image they presented to me by their wealth, as though all their money, possessions, and stock options acted like giant mirrors, proliferating them across any given social space like opposing mirrors in a lift. These days, we were getting close to being able to assume that anyone at level 1 was a billionaire. Not quite in the same financially stratospheric league represented by Bill Gates or the Sultan of Brunei, but not far off it, maybe a factor of 10 away. The only other level 1 exec present was Madame Chasso, a small, brittle-looking lady of about 60, who sported tiny glasses and wore her unfeasibly black hair in a tight bun. She had a thin, pinched face and was chain-smoking Dunhills. Besides Uncle Freddy, there were 5 other second-level people, including the recently promoted Adrian Potenhot, Hazelton's protégé and main man in Europe. He was a tall but podgy Englishman with a mid-Atlantic accent, who, until I'd come along, had been the youngest person to make it to level 3. We'd never got on, though Uncle Freddy had a soft spot for him, because he was another petrol head, and so always got a tour of the car collection when he came to Bliss Craig. He was rumoured to have some sort of thing going with Madame Chasso, though nobody was sure. And as she rarely left Switzerland, and he was often at Hazelton's side in the States, it could only have been pretty sporadic. Personally, I found the very idea of the two of them bumping uglies profoundly unsettling. The other level 2s were M.M. Abila, a small, mostly silent 70-year-old Moroccan, Christoph Tischler, a merry-looking German geezer of extravagant and seemingly self-satisfied plumpness, and Jesus Besseria, an aristocratic-looking Portuguese with darkly hooded eyes. There was only one other level 3 there, Stephen Buzetsky, a sandy-haired, rangy-limbed guy with freckles, crinkly eyes, a few years older than me, whom I loved, and whom I'd loved from the first moment I'd set eyes on him, and who knew this, and who was obviously and genuinely flattered and embarrassed by this in equal measure, and who was so intolerably perfect and nice and lovable that he wouldn't cheat on his wife, to whom he wasn't even all that happily married, just faithful, the bastard. "They do say the Russians need a strong man, their Tsars, their Stalin," Suvindertung put in, letting one of his servants pour his port, while he undid his bow tie and unbuttoned his dinner jacket.
The prince wore a dark purple cummerbund secured by golden clasps. He was given to sticking both thumbs into the broad belt and stretching it against his belly. I wondered if he was trying to twang it. Maybe he didn't know a good cummerbund doesn't twang.
"Perhaps," the prince said, "they need another one." "What they might get, Prince, is the communists back," Hazelton drawled. "If I didn't think Yeltsin was just an alcoholic clown, I could believe he was secretly a communist himself, supposed to appear to attempt capitalism, but then make such a god-awful mess of it that the Brezhnev days look like a golden age in comparison, and the Marxist-Leninists like saviors."
"Miss Telman," Madame Chasseau said, suddenly in her sharp little voice, "I understand you visited Russia recently. Have you any thoughts on the matter?"
I blew out some smoke. I'd intended to keep my head down for the rest of the after-dinner discussion. Having earlier revealed myself to all as a dangerous radical, I'd contrasted unfavorably the West's reaction to a bunch of the already very rich getting caught out in their hedge fund speculations with that of the response to the unfolding catastrophe caused by Hurricane Mitch. In one case, a rescue fund of several billion US dollars was put together within a few days. In the other, a couple of million had eventually been pledged, as long as there was no dangerous talk about a debt moratorium, or even, perish the thought, a total write-off. "Yes, I was," I said, "but I was there to look at a few interesting technologies, rather than at their society as a whole." "What's happened," Adrian Potenhot said, "is that the Russians have created their own form of capitalism in the image of what was portrayed to them as the reality of the West by the old Soviet Union's propaganda machine. They were informed that there was nothing but gangsterism, gross and endemic corruption, naked profiteering, a vast, starving, utterly exploited underclass, and a tiny number of rapacious, vicious capitalist crooks who were entirely above the law. Of course, even at its most laissez-faire, the West was never remotely like that. But that's what the Russians have now created for themselves." "You mean Radio-Free Europe didn't convince them how sweet life here in the West really was?" Hazelton said, with a smile. "Maybe it did," Potenhot conceded. "Maybe most thought it was diametrically equivalent propaganda and took an average." "The Soviets never slandered the West like that," I said. "No?" Potenhot said. "I've seen the old films. Looked like it to me." "Very old and not representative, then. The point is that the Russians don't really have capitalism at all right now. People don't pay their taxes, so the state can't pay its employees. The majority of people exist through self-sufficiency and bartering. And there's negligible accumulation of capital, reinvestment, and development, because all the money's siphoned off to Swiss banks, including ours. So what they actually have is barbarism." "I'm not saying many Russians believed life in the West was as awful as it was sometimes portrayed," Potenhot said. "There's just a nice symmetry to the fact that it's the caricature they're in the process of copying, not the reality. I don't think they understand it themselves." "Whereas you obviously do," I suggested. "Anything we could do?" Hazelton asked me. "To profit us, or to help them?" I asked. "Well, preferably both." I thought. We'd probably be doing civilization in general a favor if we had... Here I mentioned a fairly well-known Russian politician. Killed. Potenhot snorted with laughter. Hazelton's blue eyes partially disappeared. A fine network of lines appeared at the corners of his eyes. "I have a feeling we may have had some sort of dealings with the gentleman already," he said. "He has his moments of slapstick, too, I'll grant, but he might not be quite as black as he's painted." I raised my eyebrows and smiled. One of the other gentlemen cleared his throat somewhere down the table. By my side, the prince sneezed. A servant appeared, flourishing a handkerchief. "You think he is as black as he's painted, Miss Tellman?" Hazelton said easily. "I have this very odd feeling," I said, "that somebody like me, though probably male," I added with a general smile,
just catching the concerned-looking gaze of Stephen Brzezinski, was sitting here nearly 70 years ago, saying the same sort of thing about Germany and a faintly comical small-time politician called Adolf Hitler. It was really only at about this point that it struck me quite how outspoken I was being. I had to remind myself, a little late perhaps, quite how powerful the people in this room were. Adrian Potenhort laughed again, then saw that Hazelton was looking very levelly and seriously at me, and stopped.
"That's quite a comparison to make, Miss Tillman," Hazelton said. "Hitler?" Uncle Freddy said suddenly, as though waking up. "Did you say Hitler, dear girl?"
I was suddenly aware that just about everybody in the room was looking at me. Herr Tischler was politely studying his cigar.
"Perhaps the trouble is you never can tell," Stephen Brzezinski said reasonably. "Maybe if somebody had shot Hitler 70 years ago, somebody else would have taken his place, and things would have worked out much the same. It depends whether you believe in the primacy of individuals or social forces, I guess." He shrugged.
"I sincerely hope I'm completely wrong," I admitted. "I imagine I probably am, but right now, Russia's the sort of place that makes thinking along such lines seem quite natural."
"Hitler was a strong man," M.M. Abila pointed out.
"He made the cattle trucks run on time," I agreed.
"The man was an evil genius, and no mistake," the prince informed us. "But Germany was in a sorry mess when he took over, was it not?"
Sovinda looked at Herr Tischler as though for support, but was ignored. "Oh, yes," I said. "It was left in a far better state after 100 divisions of the Red Army had paid a visit and a succession of 1,000-bomber raids had stopped by."
"Well, now," began Stephen Brzezinski. "Do you really think it is our business to go around having politicians shot, Miss Tillman?" asked Jesus Bessoria, raising his voice to shout down Stephen.
"No," I said.
I looked at Hazelton, whom I knew had made a lot of money for himself and us in both Central and South America over the years.
"I'm sure that would never even cross our minds."
"Or if it did, we would swiftly dismiss it, Miss Tillman," Hazelton said with a steely smile, "because acting upon such a thought would make us bad people, would it not?"
Was I being ganged up on? I was certainly being invited to keep deepening the hole I seemed already to be digging for myself. "It might make us no better than anybody else," I said, then looked at Uncle Freddy, blinking furiously beneath his cloud of white hair to my left. "However, proportionately, to quote Mr. Ferrandonald, we might hope to be ahead when the pain's shared out."
"Pain can be a good thing," Potenhort said.
"Relatively," I said. "In evolutionary terms, it's better to feel pain and rest up than to carry on walking and hunting on an injured leg, say. But
it's about discipline, isn't it?" Potenhort said.
"Is it?"
"Pain teaches you a lesson."
"It's one way. There are others."
"Sometimes there is no alternative."
"Really?" I widened my eyes. "Gosh."
"It's like a child," he explained patiently. "You can argue with it and get nowhere, or you can just administer a short, sharp smack and it's all cleared up. That applies to parents with children, schools, any relationship where one half knows what's best for the other half."
"I see, Mr. Potenhort," I said. "And do you beat your other half? I mean, do you beat your own children?"
"I don't beat them," Potenhort said with a laugh. "I give them the occasional slap."
He looked round the others.
"Every family has a naughty stick, doesn't it?"
"Were you beaten as a child, Adrian?" I asked.
He smiled. "Quite a lot. At school, actually."
He lowered his head a little as he looked round the others, as though quietly proud of this proof he'd obviously been a bit of a lad.
"Never did me any harm."
"My God," I said, sitting back. "You mean you'd have been like this anyway?"
"You don't have any children, do you, Kate?" he said, oblivious.
"Indeed not," I agreed. "So I don't really know what I'm talking about, I suppose," I said, breezily, "though I do seem to recall being a child."
I guess we all need to be taught a lesson, Stephen Brzezinski said casually, reaching for a large onyx ashtray and grinding out his cigar. I think we need to be taught that gambling don't pay. He looked towards a rather slumped Uncle Freddy and grinned. That casino of yours open yet, sir?
Casino, Uncle Freddy said, sitting upright again. What a splendid idea.
Just fuck me, Stephen.
It wouldn't be right, Kate.
Then just let me fuck you. You won't have to do a thing. I'll do it all. It'll be fabulous. Dreamlike. You can pretend it never happened.
That wouldn't be right either.
It would be all right. It would be very right. Trust me, it would be the rightest, sweetest, nicest thing that ever happened to either of us. I know this. I do. I feel it in my water. You can trust me. Just let me.
Kate, I made a promise. I took these vows.
So does everybody. They cheat.
I know people cheat.
Everybody cheats.
No, they don't.
Every man does.
They do not.
Everyone I've met does. Or would if I let them.
That's you. You're just so enticing.
Except to you.
No, to me too.
But you can resist.
I'm afraid so.
We were standing in the darkness by the stone wall at one end of the mile-long reflecting lake. The house lay behind us. Uncle Freddy had had the newly renovated gas flare path lit for the first time that night. Suvinder Zung had been allowed to ignite it, and a small plaque to this effect had been unveiled, to the prince's obvious delight. Gas burbled with a comical farting noise from 100 different patches of water. Flames burned above, detached torches on a wide obsidian floor 1,500 meters long. The converging florets of yellow flame receded into the distance, becoming tiny, stitching the night. If you looked closely, you could see the little blue cones of pilot lights hissing away at the end of thin copper pipes, sticking out above the water in the middle of each darkly bubbling source of fire. I had gambled in the casino. I was gambling now, though with no real hope of winning. I had talked to various people. I had even made some sort of peace with Adrian Potenhot. I had put off Suvinder Zung as politely but firmly as possible when he tried to get me to come to his room. I had stood on the terrace with everybody else to watch fireworks crack and splash across the night skies above the valley, casually shooing off the straying, right, ring-encrusted hand of the prince as he came to stand by me and try to fondle my bum. Elsewhere in the main house, there were rooms you could go to for drugs, and apparently there was one where there was some sort of live sex show going on, which might turn into an orgy later, depending on demand. I had talked to the poet and the soprano, found myself being embarrassingly girly with the aging rock singer on whom I'd had a crush in my teens, and being chatted up by both the American conductor and the Oxford Don. I had said hello to the monument in muscle and bronze Armani that was Colin Walker as he stood behind Hazelton, who was playing at the blackjack table, and asked him how he'd been enjoying his visit to Britain. He told me, in his soft, measured voice, that he had only flown in yesterday, but that so far it had been just fine, ma'am. I had danced energetically to what I suppose was rave music in one of the small ballrooms with some of the younger execs and fellow guests, and more sedately to the music of the 40s and 50s, played by a big band in the largest ballroom, where most of the higher-level people were. Suvinder Zung, twinkle-toed and undeniably impressive, had swept and dipped me around the room a couple of times, though by then, thankfully, he was starting to become distracted by a couple of lissom beauties, one blonde, one auburn, whom I assumed were the cavalry, dispatched to my rescue by Uncle Freddy. It was there, in the ballroom, that I'd encountered Stephen Brzezinski again at last, and persuaded him to get up onto the floor and danced with him, and eventually danced him out into the night air, and then along a terrace from which we'd seen again the lights of the reflecting lake. I'd taken my shoes off, and he'd carried them for me as we'd crossed the lawn. It was cold, and my little blue-black Versace number didn't provide much in the way of warmth, so this had given me the perfect excuse to hug him and be hugged by him, and have him put his jacket round me, which smelled of him. My shoes stuck out of his jacket pockets. "Stephen, you're a rich and handsome man. You're a nice guy. But life's too short, damn it. What's wrong with you?" I balled a fist and thumped him gently on the chest. Is it me? Am I so unattractive? Am I too old? That's it, isn't it? I'm just too old. He grinned, face lit by the dully roaring yellow flames. Kate, we've been through this before. You're one of the most beautiful and attractive women I've ever had the good fortune to meet. I cuddled into him, hugging him tighter, pathetically, adolescently delighted by what had to be an outright lie. Nothing about my age, then, I muttered into his shirt. He laughed. Look, you're younger than me, and you certainly don't look your age anyway. Satisfied? Yes. No. I pulled back and looked into his eyes. So, what? Can't you stand women who take the initiative? We had, as he'd said, been through all this before, but this too was a dance, something that had to be gone through. The first time we'd been over this ground, 4 years earlier, I'd suggested he might be gay. He rolled his eyes. That was when I knew just how perfect he was, from the way he did that. Because rolling his eyes in that way, even if it hadn't seemed like an impossibly cute expression in its own right, just made it so obvious that this had happened to him before, that women had accused him of being gay in the past, in their confused and wounded pride at being rejected, and he was getting fed up hearing it. That was when I knew it really wasn't just me. It was other women, too. Very possibly all of them. He really was faithful to his wife, and really not being either especially choosy or mildly sadistic, which of course made him perfect, because that's what we try to forget, isn't it? If he'll cheat on her with you, he'll cheat on you with somebody else by and by. So finding a man like this was like hitting the jackpot, discovering the mother lode, closing the deal of your life, only to find the pot had already been cleaned out, the claim had been staked by somebody else, and the papers had already been signed without you. My girlfriends and I had been over this territory often enough to... By the time you got to our age, all the good ones were gone. But until you got to our age, you couldn't tell which ones were the good ones. What were you supposed to do? Marry young and hope, I suppose? Or wait for the divorcees and trust you got one who'd been a cheatee rather than a cheater? Or lower your standards, or settle for a different type of life altogether, which revolved around you as an individual, and not you as one half of a couple, and which was anyway what I'd always thought I'd wanted, until I'd met Stephen. No, I find it flattering when women take the initiative. You just never give in. What can I tell you? I'm just a boring one-woman guy. Which meant, of course, as he was a very honest, but also pretty smart guy, and he had chosen not to give me a straight answer, that he probably had strayed once, and so knew what he was talking about, which only made me even more sad, because it hadn't been with me that he'd been unfaithful, and so I'd lost out not once but twice. Everybody else is doing it, Stephen. Hey, come on, Kate. What sort of argument is that? Besides, I'm not them. But you're missing out. It's an opportunity. You're missing out, I repeated, lamely. It's not some business thing, Kate. Yes, it is. Everything is. Everything is trade, transactions, options, futures. Marriage is. Always has been. I'm offering you a deal that would be great for both of us, where neither of us loses. Pure gain, total satisfaction on both sides. A deal you're crazy to turn down. I've got my peace of mind to lose, Kate. I've got a whole guilt trip waiting for me if I did. I'd have to tell Em. Are you mad? Don't tell her. She might find out anyway. She'd divorce me, take the kids. She'd never know. I'm not asking you to leave her or the children. I just want whatever I can get from you. Anything. An affair. A single night. One fuck. Anything. I can't, Kate. You don't even love her. I do. No, you don't. You're just comfortable with her. Well, you know, maybe that's what passion becomes, what it grows into. It doesn't have to be. How can you be so determined, so ambitious in your business life, and so meek in private? You shouldn't settle for so little. Or if you need that bland comfort bit, you should have the passion too, with somebody else. With me. You deserve it. He let go of me gently,
holding my hands in his and looking into my eyes. Kate, even with you, I don't want to talk about Em and the children. He looked embarrassed. Don't you see? To me, this is like having an affair. I get guilty just talking about this sort of thing with you.
So you've nothing to lose.
So I've everything to lose. Believe me, this guilt is barely registering on my inbuilt guiltometer. But it still troubles me. If I climbed into bed with you, it'd go off the scale. I sank back towards him, closing my eyes at the very thought. Believe me, Stephen, a lot would go off the scale. He laughed quietly and pushed me away again. I didn't think you could push somebody away tenderly, but he did. I just can't, Kate, he said solemnly, and the way he said it just had that stamp of closure over it. We'd reached some sort of interim result, if not a conclusion. I could still choose to pursue the matter if I insisted, but only at the risk of seriously pissing him off. I shook my head. Guiltometer, really? You know what I mean? Yeah, I sighed. I guess I do. He shivered in his white dress shirt. Hey, it's getting kind of cold out here, don't you think? It is. Let's go back. I think I'll go for a swim before I turn in.
I'll come and watch. May I?
Sure.
Bliss-Craig's pool was only a little short of Olympic in size, buried underground at the end of a tangle of corridors and locatable principally by smell. I went arm in arm with Stephen down the carpeted corridors. The place was dark when we arrived, and we had to search for the light switches, feeling round the walls until we found them, and the lights flickered on above and below the still water. The walls were covered with trompe-l'oeil paintings showing pastoral scenes set in a landscape more gently rolling than that surrounding Bliss-Craig, and partially obscured by white Doric columns spaced every few meters. There were numerous tables, chairs, loungers, and potted plants positioned near the walls on 2 room-long strips of astroturf, and a bar at the far end of the huge space. The arched roof was painted blue with lots of little white fluffy clouds. I stood looking out over the calm blue surface while Stephen disappeared into the changing rooms. People had been here earlier. The tiled floor was puddled. There were towels and bits of swimming costumes scattered round, and a welter of poolside safe plastic flutes stood or lay by champagne buckets on the tables, or had fallen to the pretend grass floor. But the place was quiet and empty now, and the waters lay level, undisturbed by even the slightest ripple, now that the recirculating pumps had been switched off. I looked at my watch. It was 5:15, much later than I'd intended to stay up. Oh, well. Stephen appeared in a pair of baggy blue trunks, grinned at me, and dived into the water. It was a beautiful dive, creating what seemed like far too small a splash, just a few tiny waves and a larger swell that moved languidly out from his point of entry. I watched his long tan body glide across the pale blue tiles on the pool's floor. Then he surfaced, shook his head once, and settled into a powerful, easy-looking crawl. I sat down by the edge of the pool, one knee drawn up under my chin, and just watched. He completed a dozen lengths, then cut across the waves to me, sticking his elbows into the gutter that ran along the underside of the pool's edge.
Having fun?
I asked. Yeah, slow pool, though.
Slow? What? Is it full of heavy water or something?
No, but it's got this sidewall, he told me, patting the tiles above the gutter. The waves reflect back out into the pool, so you're always slapping into them. Modern pools don't have walls. The water goes right to the top and spills into a flush trench under a grating.
I thought about this. He was right, of course.
Carries a lot of the wave energy away, he said. Gives you calmer water. Makes the pool faster.
I see.
He looked puzzled. Think you could swim in heavy water?
H2O2? Very buoyantly, I imagine.
Oh, well. Think I'll get out now.
I'll wait.
He struck out for the chrome steps in one corner, lifted himself out in one exquisite flowing movement, and dripped away to the changing rooms. I sat listening to the air conditioning hum and watched the reflections the waters cast on the ceilings and walls. Their long, twisting veins of gold shimmered across the artificial sky and flickered amongst the grooved surfaces of the white plaster columns. I looked down at the chopping waters of the pool, recalling how perfectly still and calm they'd been when we'd arrived. Every wave, every ripple on that surface, as well as every dancing flick of light curving across the vault of sky and clouds above, had been caused by him, by his body. His muscles powering the shape and weight and surface of his frame through those waters had spread that grace and effort throughout the pool and sent the light unwinding across the painted clouds and sky. I rocked forward, reaching one hand down to the water's surface, and let the liquid come up to meet my flattened palm. The little waves hitting my skin like a succession of soft caresses, their gentle, patting beat like that of an inconstant heart. The waters calmed gradually again. The waves fell back and smoothed slowly out. The veins of light dancing on the ceiling became lazier and broader, like a river flowing towards the sea. The air conditioner hummed. "Okay," Stephen said. I looked up at him. One part of me wanted to let him go back by himself, so that I could stay here alone, with the humming silence of the air and the slow averaging of the lulling waters. But his freckled face, tired though still smiling and open and friendly, wouldn't let me. I accepted a hand. We switched off the lights and returned to the main house. He saw me to my room door, kissed me lightly on the cheek, and told me to sleep well, which, eventually, I did. "Yes, hello?"
"Catherine, is that you?"
Speaking? Speaking, yes, who's that?"
Me. It is me."
"Prince? Suvinder?"
"Yes, Catherine."
"Suvinder, it's the middle of the night."
"Ah, no."
"What?"
"I must correct you there, Catherine. It is not the middle of the night. No.
"Prince, hold on, it's 6:30 in the morning."
There, you see?"
"Suvinder, it's still dark. I've had 1 hour's sleep, and I was hoping for a good 5 or 6 more minimum. As far as I'm concerned, it is the middle of the night. Now, unless you have something very important to say to me..."
"Catherine."
"Yes, Suvinder."
"Catherine."
"Yes?"
"Catherine."
"Prince, you sound terribly drunk."
"I am, Catherine. I am very terribly drunk and very sad."
"Why are you sad, Suvinder?"
"I have been unfaithful to you."
"What?"
"Those 2 lovely ladies. I fell for their manifold charms."
"You?"
"Catherine, I am a man of easy virtue."
"You and all the rest, Prince. Look, I'm very glad for you. I hope those 2 young ladies made you extremely happy, and you were able to do the same for them. And you mustn't worry. You can't be unfaithful to me, because I'm not your wife or your girlfriend. We haven't made any promises to each other, and therefore you can't be unfaithful. Do you see?"
"But I have."
"You have what?"
"I have made promises, Catherine."
"Not that I was aware of, Suvinder. Not to me."
"No, they were made in my heart, Catherine."
"Were they now?" "Well, I'm very flattered, Suvinder, but you mustn't feel bad about it. I forgive you, all right? I forgive you for any previous and all future transgressions. How's that? You just go on and have a whale of a time to yourself, and I won't be bothered in the least. I'll be happy for you."
"Catherine."
"Yes."
"Catherine."
"Suvinder." What? Can I hope?
Hope?
That one day you will look upon me kindly.
I already do, Savinder. I look upon you very kindly. I like you. I hope I am your friend.
That is not what I meant, Catherine.
No, I didn't think it was.
May I hope, Catherine?
Prince?
May I, Catherine?
Savinder.
Just say that it is not a lost cause which I am pursuing, Catherine.
Savinder, I do like you, and I'm honestly very flattered indeed that...
Always women say this. They are flattered. They say friend, they say like, and always later comes but this, but that. But I am married, but you are too old, but your mother will put a curse on me, but I am too young, but I am not really a girl.
What?
I thought you would be different, Catherine. I hoped that maybe you would not, but you do. It is not fair, Catherine. It is not fair. It is pride or racism or classism.
Prince, please. I've had a lot of disturbed sleep recently. I really need to get some quality rest in at some point.
Now I have upset you.
Savinder, please.
I have made you upset with me. I can tell from your voice. Your patience is exhausted, is it not?
Savinder, just let me go back to sleep. Please. Maybe we should just, stop now. We can talk about this in the morning. Things will look different then. I think we both need our sleep.
Let me come to see you.
No, Savinder.
Tell me which room you are in, please, Catherine.
Absolutely not, Savinder.
Please.
No.
I am a man, Catherine.
What? Yes, I know, Savinder.
A man has needs. What was that? Did you just sigh, Catherine?
Prince, I don't want to be rude, but I really need to get back to sleep now, and I'm asking you to say good night and let me get some rest. So please, just say good night.
Very well. I shall go now. But, Catherine...
Yes?
I shall not cease to hope.
Good for you.
I mean it, Catherine.
I'm sure you do.
I do. I mean it.
Well, hurrah.
Yes. Well, good night, Catherine.
Good night, Savinder. Chapter 4. Let me explain some things about the way our company works. The first thing to understand is that we are, up to a point, democratic. Put simply, we vote for our bosses. Never mind about that for now. We'll come back to it. Secondly, we're quite serious about insisting that if people want to rise above a certain level in the corporate hierarchy, they must renounce any religious faith they have previously espoused. In practice, all this means is that an executive promoted to the rank we once called magistratus, then deacon, and now call level 6, has to swear they've given up their faith. We don't insist that people stop going to their churches or their temples, or stop worshipping either in public or in private, or even stop funding religious works, though some sort of gesture in this direction is generally expected and appreciated. We certainly do not insist that people stop believing in their heads, or their souls, if you will. All that's required is that people are prepared to swear they've stopped believing. This is quite sufficient to weed out the real zealots, the sort of people, admirable in their way if you esteem that sort of behavior, who would prefer to be burned alive than switch to a different branch of the same church. Thirdly, we practice total financial transparency. Any company officer may inspect the accounts of any other. This has become much easier technically in recent years, of course, with the advent of computers and electronic mail. But the principle has been around since the 1st century A.D. Its effect is to make corruption, as a rule, either unachievable or only possible at a trivial scale. The main downside is complication. This was the case when people had to open up cabinets full of wax tablets for inspection, when they had to unroll papyrus scrolls, when they had to unchain books from counting room desks, when they had to order old ledgers from storage, when they had to search through microfiches. And it is certainly the case now with computerized accounts. Over 2 millennia, every technological advance that promised to make the task easier has been closely and seemingly inevitably accompanied by an increase in the complexity of the figures and systems involved. Always looking for ways to cut costs, we've carried out trials which involve abandoning this practice for specific times and in certain places, intending to give it up entirely if the trials prove successful. But the results have always persuaded us that the benefits outweigh the costs. Of course, corruption's always possible, and probably inevitable. A company worry has always been that one of our number might siphon off very small amounts of money over a long period, and use that as seed capital for transactions which, though they exist outside the business, are only possible thanks to the contacts, trust, and information that person's membership of the company has brought, and which grow exponentially until they distort the relationship between the apparent and real economic effect that person produces. This sort of scam has been tried by various individuals in the past, but as a rule, such perpetrators are discovered. Unless they intend to bury their gains in the ground, they have to do something with the profits, and an executive living significantly beyond their so easily checkable means has always been a sure sign some sort of chicanery has been going on. If somebody plays the long game of building up a big cash fund somewhere we can't see, while continuing to live relatively modestly, and then retires early, suddenly seriously moneyed to own their own Caribbean island, we're not above indulging in our own style of chicanery to try and recover the funds we reckon belong to us. We aren't the mafia, and as far as I know, we don't blow anybody's legs off. But it's surprising what you can do when you have your own Swiss bank, and you're owed favours that go back in some cases for centuries. Actually, maybe it's not surprising at all. Still, it is possible to beat the system big time. In the late 19th century, a certain Monsieur Coupable, one of our senior French executives, made a sizable independent fortune on the Paris Bourse, which we didn't know about until he died. He'd spent every centime buying Dutch old masters, which he kept in a secret art gallery beneath his Loire chateau. So there you are. You do have to bury your money in the ground. We never did get our hands on those paintings, despite having some very capable lawyers, and the cooperation of the late Monsieur Coupable's widow. They were childless. He'd willed the secret collection to his mistress. Anyway, this practice has now become known as coufabling. As a business, we try very hard not to get coufabled. Usually what's ours stays ours. A legitimately made fortune is never entirely personal in the business, and specifically it is impossible to bequeath all you've made to your offspring, or indeed anybody else who isn't one of us. The higher a person rises within our company, the greater becomes the proportion of their income paid in the form of stock options, pension rights, travel, and other perks, and so on. So far, so normal. Lots of corporations limit the personal tax exposure of their senior people by giving them access to and often unlimited use of cars and drivers, apartments, mansions, aircrafts, and yachts. The Learjet might belong to the company and be shown as a tax-liable item on the corporate books, but it's at the exclusive disposal of the CEO, who can use it to go shopping or golfing if he damn well pleases. In the same way, it's the company that pays for the box at the opera, or the ball game, and the membership of the yacht or country club. We do the same sort of thing, except perhaps more so. The difference between us and others lies in the disposability of the assets that are nominally the property of the executive involved. Most of these can be sold back only to others in the business,
And even then, there is a strict ranking of how much one can own according to one's hierarchical level. What this means is that dynasties are difficult to establish and almost impossible to maintain, no matter how doting a father in the business may be. He cannot pass on all his power and money to a favorite son just because he wants to. The father can make the son rich by most people's standards, and he can attempt to further his boy's career in the company. But he cannot make Junior as rich as he's been, or ensure that he too achieves the organization's summit. The vast majority of senior execs are quite happy with this arrangement, and they're usually the sort of people who believe that hard work and brains are the keys to success, and have formed a dim view of any privilege which has been inherited rather than earned. This sort of attitude can actually be seen more clearly outside the business, where quite a few very rich and successful fathers, who've been in total charge of their own companies, have left their children an only modest provision in their wills, not through general or specific vindictiveness, but just to ensure that their offspring don't start out spoiled, and so that they too will know that if they do achieve anything, it has at least partially been due to their own abilities, rather than the sheer good luck of having a rich daddy. Naturally, all this changes if the individual in the company invents something or has patents to their name. Take Uncle Freddy, for example. An associate level 2, he would probably only be a level 5 or 6, but for the fact that he invented the chilp. The chilp is the technical name, Uncle Freddy's own. I think he's a trifle sad it never caught on, for those little containers of whitish liquid that you get in tourist class, in aircraft or in cafes, service stations, and not very good hotels instead of a proper jug of milk. The original things were those ghastly little pots with aluminium covers that it took both hands to open, if you were lucky, and which, even if you opened them carefully, usually splattered their contents over you. It was Uncle Freddy who came up with the much neater modern version, which opens cleanly and can be worked with one hand. One of those things most of us look at and think, why didn't anybody think of that before? Or I could have thought of that, except that Uncle Freddy actually did. Chilps are literally tiny things, but they're produced by the billion every year. The tiniest royalty on each one soon builds up to a very considerable fortune indeed. And as Uncle F invented the thing, he's got the patent, and so he gets all the money. His promotion to level 2 in the business was honorary. That kind of thing can throw out our system a bit, but somehow we manage to accommodate even the Uncle Freddys of the world. A better solution for us as a company, of course, would have been to have owned the patents corporately. And there are a few lucrative ones which we do own, and a few more we are cautiously optimistic about. An example is the Iain can. This is a tube made from aluminium, plastic, or even waxed paper, designed to deliver 2 measured doses of finely ground powder into the nasal passages. It's registered with every major patent office in the world as a way to deliver either snuff or some sort of medicinal draught into the user's nose. But nobody who knows about it is under any illusions about its real role, and we have no intentions of letting it be used for such mundane purpose. It's a cocaine delivery device for when, eventually, the stuff is legalized. You'll buy a pack of Iain cans, no bigger than a pack of long cigarettes, from wherever is licensed to sell them, by which time, of course, you may not be able to purchase legally a pack of tobacco cigarettes. Pop the tab off one, snort, snort, and bingo. No chopping, cutting, and ploughing into stupid little lines on a mirror or the top of a toilet cistern, unless you're so into ritual you regard that as the best bit. I've tried them at our labs in Miami. They work. Best of all, for us, they work only once. Unless you're some sort of Unabomber-style micro-engineer, you can't easily refill them. The aluminium ones are very sleek and sexy, and will be the original premium product. They look a little like silver rifle shell cases. We may do steel, gold-plated versions for the luxury and exclusive gift end of the market. The plastic version is more mass-market, more blue-collar. The wax paper ones are aimed at the more environmentally aware consumer and are biodegradable. We have high hopes for the Iain can. Back to the subject of corruption, racketeering, bribery, blackmail, and other common business practices. Even though our organization has always been tolerant of such victimless crimes as prostitution, blasphemy, drug-taking, belonging to a trade union, sex and/or procreation outside marriage, homosexuality, and so on, the societies in which we have to live and with which we have to trade have usually had other ideas. So secrecy and blackmail have never been entirely off the menu. We are, above all, pragmatists. Corruption is frowned upon, not because it is intrinsically evil, but because it acts like a short circuit in the machinery of business, or a parasite on the body corporate. The point is to reduce such behavior to a tolerable level, not to attempt seriously to eradicate it utterly, which would call for a regime so strict and confining it would limit the abilities of the organization to change and adapt, and stifle its natural enterprise even more severely than widespread corruption would. Even so, what we regard as a tolerable level of internal corruption is, thanks to our rules on financial transparency, positively microscopic compared to that in just about every other organization we do business with. And it is a matter of considerable pride for us that in any given transaction or deal, we will almost without exception be the most honest and principled party involved. We're quite happy to deal with corrupt regimes and people, so long as the figures are all above board at our end. In many cultures, a degree of what is termed corruption in the West has long been a respectable and accepted part of the way business is done, and we are ready, willing, and able to accommodate this. In the West, of course, it is just as common. It's just not respectable or publicized. In all this, of course, we're just the same as any other business or state. It's just that we've been doing it longer and are less hypocritical about it, so we're better at it. Practice makes perfect, even the practice of corruption. It ought to be one of our mottos. Corruption, we deal with it. Voting for your immediate superiors usually strikes outsiders as the most bizarre of our business practices. Manual and clerical workers tend to find the concept unlikely and bizarre, while those higher up have been known to react with outraged disbelief. How can it possibly work? It works, I guess, because people generally are not stupid, and we do our best to recruit people who are smarter than most. It works also because we're used to taking, and are able to take, a long-term view, and perhaps because the practice does not extend into every other organization we deal with and undertake joint operations with. We have had several expensive but unpublished studies performed by highly respected universities and business colleges, which have tended to support our belief that letting people vote for their bosses means that a greater proportion of able and gifted people flourish and rise using this method than any other. The more usual system, where people are picked out from above, does have certain advantages. Talented people can often rise more quickly, skipping several layers of management at once. But it is our firm belief that this leads to more problems than it solves, producing a culture where those on any given level within a company are constantly trying to find ways to flatter those above them, sabotage the careers of their colleagues on the same corporate rung, exploit, oppress, and denigrate those on the levels beneath them, and generally spend far too much time frivolously furthering their own selfish ends and their status within the company, when they ought rightfully to be engaged in the far more serious and productive pursuit of making all concerned more money. Our system doesn't put an end to all office politics, of course, nor does it reliably weed out every plausible rogue, gifted bully, or lucky idiot. But it does make them easier to spot, control, and ditch before they get too far. Gaining promotion by fooling your boss, especially one prone to flattery or sexual favors, can be relatively easy. Gaining the trust of those who work with you every day and will have to take orders from you if you are promoted is a lot more difficult. The usual objection to all this is, don't people tend to vote for people who will give them an easy ride? Sometimes they do, and a division of our company might suffer, because there is a natural-born vacillator in charge. But people can be demoted by those immediately below them, too, or pensioned off. And, worst case, an entire department can be closed down from above, its structure dismantled, its duties redistributed, and its personnel dispersed. This almost never happens. People would rather elect to put somebody in charge over them who knows what they're doing and whom they respect, even if they know that some of that person's later decisions will be disagreeable, than work under somebody who will damage all their interests by taking either no decisions or only easy ones. We have work councils, too, in most of our wholly owned subsidiaries, though those tend to be at the sort of levels I'm not terribly familiar with. None of this means that management is powerless. It's just that the spread of any given individual's power is different, tending to spread more upwards and less downwards compared to the standard model. It's still possible for senior people to encourage the careers of juniors, and it's still possible for juniors to make themselves known to seniors and benefit thereby. It's just that neither can act without the tacit consent of those who will have to live with the effects of those actions. We run, generally, a happy ship. So, why have you never heard of us until now? We're not conspiratorial, or even particularly secretive. We don't believe in advertising ourselves, but we're sufficiently convinced of our own probity to be relaxed about any publicity that happens to come our way. The most sinister reason given for our relative obscurity is that because we practice financial transparency and internal democracy, while frowning upon conventional familial inheritance, the world's media, generally run by people for whom any one of these ideas is anathema, regard it as profoundly in their own interests to give us as little exposure as possible. Another reason is that we undertake many more joint ventures than we do wholly owned ones, and in such situations we always let our partner company take the credit and deal with the exposure. We are a holding company, mostly, our interests lying in other companies rather than physically manufacturing products or providing services direct to the public. So we're partly invisible. Also, we have a variety of different company names and corporate identities for each individual branch of the business, all accrued naturally over the centuries, and so have no single name apart from the business, of course, which is so bland, general, and vague it's almost a form of invisibility in itself. We do sometimes get confused with the CIA, though, which is silly. They're the company. Besides, they're much more open than we are. There's no sign on the DC Beltway or anywhere else pointing to our HQ. When somebody, sometimes a journalist, more usually a competitor, does start to investigate one of our concerns, they find that the ownership trail leads, sometimes straight, sometimes only after the sort of Byzantine flourishes and convolutions which are a good creative accountant's artistic signature, to one of those places that act as the commercial world's equivalent of black holes, into which public information might fall, but from which none ever emerges. The Cayman Islands, Liechtenstein, or our very own Great Inagua. We are not, however, totally invisible. There are articles about us occasionally in magazines and newspapers. Sometimes there are television programs that touch upon our interests. And every now and again, a business book will mention us. The conspiracy theories are the most fun. There have been a couple of books and a number of articles, but the true home of those who would be our nemesis was the net, and now is the web. We have dozens of websites dedicated to us, not one of which is our own. According to which one you choose to believe, we are either A, the major force behind the New World Order, which appears to be what Americans, too stupid to realize that the Cold War is over, they won, and the world is theirs, have adopted as the new bogey monster, now that Ronnie's evil empire has a GNP a little less than Disney Corporation. B,
an even more extreme, hideous and sinister branch of the international Zionist conspiracy, in other words, the Jews. C, a long-term, deep entryist group of dedicated cadres charged by the Executive Council of the Fourth International to bring down the entire capitalist system from within by gaining control of lots of shares and then selling them all at once to produce a crash, which is the one I find most amusing. D, a well-funded cabal of the little-known worshippers of Nostradamus cult, intent on bringing about the end of the financial world through a roughly similar strategy to that of the international Marxists, which may or may not imply a rethink for this plucky group of theorists if we do all make it past the millennium. E, the militant commercial wing of the Roman Catholic Church, as if, given the antics of the Banco Ambrosio and the Black Friars, they needed one. F, a similarly extremist Islamic syndicate sworn to outperform, outdeal, and outhaggle the Jews, probably the least plausible so far. G, a zombie-like remnant of the Holy Roman Empire, which has risen from the grave, unspeakably putrid but grotesquely powerful, to reimpose European dominance over the New World in general, and the USA in particular, through sneaky cosmopolitan business practices and the introduction of the euro. Top prize for invention, I feel. H, the front for a cartel of Jewish Negro financiers intent on enslaving the white race. I confess I'm still waiting for my first introduction to a Jewish Negro financier, but maybe I just move in the wrong circles. Except I don't. I, an alien conspiracy run from a spacecraft buried under the New Mexico desert, sent to bring about the collapse of, well, see any or all of the above. Or, J, just Bill Gates' retirement fund. Heck, we've all been there. You've reinstated the underwater nighttime flare path and cleared the weeds out of your mile-long landing lake. Some enterprising pilot skimmed a dinky-looking dove-white Ilyushin seaplane successfully down over the hills and trees, kissed it onto the water, and taxied noisily to the far end of the waterway, to considerable applause from all those sports fans who've managed to prise themselves out of bed for the crack of noon. And then your steam catapult, guaranteed repaired by the best technicians money can buy just yesterday, suddenly goes on the blink. Hellish, isn't it? Actually, I thought the pilot, a dashing Iranian, looked relieved. Bugger and blast! Don't take it personally, Uncle Freddy. Damn it, bugger and blast! Uncle Freddy's shepherd's crook decapitated 2 urns worth of Michaelmas daisies and hydrangeas with one swinging swish. Well, we missed the spectacle of an ex-Soviet Navy seaplane being catapulted across the valley at the hills on the far side. If you looked carefully, you could still see the craters where the engineers had fired old trucks loaded with steel plate into the woods to calibrate the catapult's throw. But we did get to play dodgems. Being battered on all sides by over-enthusiastic revelers, without either a decent hangover or the rudiments of driving ability, while sitting in a small car resembling a garishly tin-plated slipper beneath an electrified metal grid, is not necessarily my idea of the best way to ease myself back into sober normality. But it seemed only polite to Uncle Freddy to join in after the disappointment with the catapult. Instant message transmission. Re-CW. Who, what, where? C. Walker, pay attention. What about him? Said hi to him yesterday at Uncle F's. Maintained he'd just flown in day before, i.e. Thursday. Does not compute. Oh, right. More detail on Adrian George's spotting of CW. Original message was garbled. Not at my end, obviously. AG saw CW while on way to office, not in it. Glimpsed presence in cab, in street. Wednesday, this would be. So, probably that aspect was garbled, too. Never mind. Okay, how's the party going? What party? You mean you're not at Bliss Craig at the moment?
Oh, yes. Party usual low-key affair, by the way. Where's your ass at? Singapore. Fun. I always thought it was a bit like the East would be if it was run by the Swiss. This is not intended as a compliment. See your point. Did you know chewing gum's banned out here? Yep. Lee Kuan Yew must have sat on a piece once and got all upset. Wonder if there's a flourishing smuggling trade. Careful. Even talking about that sort of thing's probably a crime. Or at least a misdemeanor. Fuck 'em. I'd laugh in the face of their vicious anti-chewing gum laws. Yeah, you're probably safe. They'd never make it stick. Ack. Goodbye. End of transmission. Kate? Uncle Freddy? I'd been summoned to Uncle F's large and chaotic study in Bliss Craig after lunch. While most people were still recovering from the excesses of one night and preparing themselves for those of the next. Gibbet E. Dessous. Gesundheit. Come now, dear girl. He's a level 1. I know. Isn't he the one in Kansas? Collects tanks and stuff? That's right. Made the news a while ago when he bought a couple of them, what do you call them, rocket thingies. Scud missiles? That's right. Was that him? I thought that was another guy in Southern California. Oh, maybe the other chap got caught then, and Gibbet didn't. That would be more like Gibbet. I can't remember. Uncle F looked confused and stared at something long, grey, and untidy on the floor, which turned out to be one of the wolfhounds. The beast stretched, yawned, with a single echoing snap of its extensive jaws, and then, such extreme activity having entirely exhausted it, rolled, flopping back over with a long sigh, and fell asleep again. Uncle Freddy opened his mouth as though to speak, then became distracted by something on his desk. Uncle F's desk was covered to a depth of several inches with a bewildering assortment of mostly paper-based rubbish. He picked up a long, elegant-looking Y-shaped piece of metal and turned it over in his hands, a look of intense concentration on his face. Then he shook his head, shrugged, and put it back again. "Anyway," I said. "Anyway, yes. Fancy paying old Gibbet a visit." "Do I have to?" "What, don't you like the fellow?" "No, I've never met him, Uncle Freddy, though his reputation goes before." "Why do I have to go and see him?" "Well, he's sort of asked to see you." "Is that good or bad?" "How do you mean, for him or you?" "For me, Uncle Freddy." Pretty damn good, I'd say. Can't do any harm getting to know old Gibbet. Very highly respected amongst the other top brass he is, oh, yes." Uncle Freddy paused. "Completely mad, of course. Thing is, you know his, nephew or something, don't you?" I said, "Dwight?" Now, there is a certain way of pronouncing Dwight's name that I find it hard to resist. Sort of Dwight? When I'm trying to make it clear that the prospect of encountering the lad again has a coefficient of attraction roughly on a par with being invited to chew on a wad of silver paper. I made no attempt to resist that temptation here. Dwight. Uncle Freddy looked puzzled, staring up at the study ceiling. Was that a real name, do you think, Kate? That Eisenhower fellow was called that too, I remember. But then he was called Ike as well, and I never could work out which was a contraction of the other. I think it is a real name, Uncle Freddy. Really? Yes. Don't worry, it's American. Ah, I see. Very good. Anyway, Gibbet wants you to talk to the boy. Uncle Freddy frowned and pulled on one pendulous earlobe. The nephew, Dwight. He's a playwright or something, isn't he? Or something. Thought that was the fellow. Is he any good, you know? As a playwright? From what I've seen, no. But of course it's all very subjective. For all I know, the boy's a genius. Modern sort of stuff, is it? He writes? Almost by definition. Uncle Freddy, why does Mr. Dessous want me to talk to Dwight? Good question. No idea. You couldn't phone? Email? Uncle Freddy looked pained and shifted uncomfortably in his seat. No, he definitely wants you to go there.
But look, Kate."
Uncle F leaned forward and settled his elbows on the desk, causing a small landslide of papers, envelopes, old magazines, scraps of newspapers, bits of tissue, and, by the sound of it, at least one until then buried glass, which fell to the floor with a thud and a faint chinking noise. Uncle Freddy sighed and spared a glance at the stuff that had fallen.
"I think there's something Gibbet wants you to talk to the boy about. Some mad idea he needs talking out of. But I've got a feeling he wants to talk to you himself as well. The nephew thing might be an excuse."
"For what?"
"Well, Gibbet's word counts for a lot with the American people in the business, from his own level, well down past yours. A lot of these young Turk types, the Keene Brigade, they think the sun shines out of his behind, frankly. People like that, at the U.S. end of things, they're making up the majority of your level these days, Kate, and the one below."
"I know, Uncle."
Exactly.
Uncle Freddy looked pleased. "Uncle Freddy, you haven't exactly answered my question."
"What question was that, dear girl?"
"Why does he want to size me up?"
For promotion, of course. Old Gibbet can put a lot of words in a lot of the right ears. As I say, the youngsters listen to him. He must have heard about you. You must have impressed him from afar. And good for you, I say."
"I'm already at level 3 now, Uncle.
I was expecting to wait a year yet before any more promotion. Right now, I don't think even I would vote for me to step up another rung." "Think long, Kate,"
Uncle Freddy said, and actually wagged a finger at me.
"You can't get a good impression in too early. That's what I always say."
"All right," I said, half elated and half suspicious. "Would the middle of the week be suitable?"
"Just about perfect, I should think. I'll check with his people."
"You still in York State?"
"Yorkshire,"
I said. It was late afternoon on the west coast, and I'd caught Luce on her way to her shrink. "At Uncle Freddy's?" "Yeah, Uncle Freddy. I was thinking, is this the old guy who used to molest you?" "Don't be ridiculous, Luce. He pats my butt now and again, but that's all. He's always been really good to me, especially after Mrs. Tellman died last year. I cried on his shoulder. I hugged him. If he'd really wanted to try anything on, that would have been the ideal opportunity. But he didn't. I'm just concerned he might have abused you in the past, and you're in denial about it, that's all." "What?" "Well, you seem to just do anything he tells you to, and you jump down my throat when I remind you this is the same guy who sexually harassed you in the past." "What? Putting his hand on my backside?" "Yeah, that's harassment. That'd get you fired from any office, most places. Interference with your fanny. Hell yes. Yeah, my American fanny. Oh, jeez. If it had been your British fanny, he would have been locked up. Well, call me less than a perfect sister if I let one old guy I happen to like a lot briefly touch my bum through a couple of layers of material. The point is, I don't count that as abuse." "But you don't know." "I don't know what?" "You don't know whether he abused you or not." "Yes, I do." "No, you don't. You think you know that he didn't, but you don't really know that he didn't." "Luce, I think we're in the same boat here. Neither of us knows what the hell you're talking about." "I mean, maybe he did much worse things to you in the past, and you've repressed all the grisly details, and even the fact that it happened in the first place. You're in denial about it all, and it's fucking you up." "But I'm not fucked up." "Ah, that's what you think." "You know, in principle, this idiocy could go on forever." "Exactly, unless you take some action to discover the truth." "Let me guess. And the only way to find out is to go to a shrink, right?" "Well, of course." "Look, are you on commission or something?" "I'm on Prozac, so what?" "I prefer prosaic. What I remember is what happened. Look, I'm sorry I bothered you, Luce. Don't hang up. Listen, this must have been meant to happen because I was just on my way. In fact, I'm here. I'm at the place. Now, look, Kate, I just think there's somebody here that you need to talk to, okay? Now, just a second. Hi. Yeah, that's right. L.T. Shro. Listen, I got somebody here on the phone I think really needs to talk to Dr. Pegging, you know?
Luce? Luce, don't you dare.
May I? He is. Oh, great.
Luce, don't you fucking dare. I won't. I'm pushing the phone down.
Hi.
Doctor, yeah, it's good to see you two. It really is. Look, I realize this is kind of weird, but I have this friend, right? Luce, listen to me, goddammit. This had better be a joke. You better be in the fucking supermarket or your manicurist or something, because I'm not going to... Hello? Ah. Who am I speaking to? I looked through narrowed eyes at the far side of my room. Okay, I thought. I said, oh, like, gee, are you another, like, weirdo? I beg your pardon? My name is Dr. Richard Pegging. I'm a psychoanalyst here in San Jose. Who might you be?
San Jose? Geez, isn't that in, like, California or someplace?
Well, yes.
Okay, listen, Doc.
Like, if you really are, like, a doc. Sort of like you said, then, like, I'm really sorry, okay? But, I mean, this woman, that woman who just, like, handed you the phone? Yes. Well, she's been calling me now for a couple of months. I mean, the first time she must have just dialed at random or something, or got me out of the book, I don't know. Oh, sorry, my name's Linda Sinkowitz. I live here in Tuna County, Florida. And I'm just, like, here, you know, and then one day I get this phone call, and it's this woman, Lucy something, and she thinks I'm her best fucking friend or something, excuse my language, and I tell her she must have, like, made a mistake, only it goes on way too long for it really to be a mistake. But, so, okay, she calls off, and that's fine. But then a few weeks later it all happens again, and this is, like, the 9th or 10th time or something, you know? I mean, I guess she needs help or something, right? But if this happens again, I'm going to have to tell the phone company. I mean, That's quite all right. That's fine. I think I get the picture, Miss Sinkowitz. Well, it's been nice talking to you. Hopefully you won't be...
Kate!
Miss Shro, if you don't mind.
Doc, do you mind? It's my fucking phone. Thank you. Kate, what the fuck's this about, Miss Sinkowitz?
Have a nice session, Luce. For the evening, we had a circus to entertain us. The word was that during the afternoon, once Suvinder Zung had been prized out of his bed and sobered up by his servants, Hazelton, Madame Chassot, and Podenhort had resumed negotiations with the prince, his private secretary B.K. Buisson, and Hisa Goodhor, his exchequer and foreign secretary, who had arrived that morning. This negotiating party was late for dinner, which was accordingly delayed for half an hour, and then went on without them. This was a little embarrassing, as we had to entertain even more rich, famous, and titled people that evening, compared to the Friday. However, Uncle Freddy made some ridiculous excuse for our absentees, guffawed a lot, and told a series of long-winded jokes, which kept everybody entertained in the drawing-room, until it was decided to go ahead with dinner anyway. My beloved was gone. Stephen Brusetsky had disappeared after breakfast that morning, called away to Washington, D.C. The circus, in a tent on the lawn, was one of these extreme affairs where people dress as though auditioning for Mad Max 4. They juggled chainsaws, attached heavy industrial machinery to their sexual organs, and rode very noisy motorbikes while doing unlikely things with knives and flaming torches. It was all terribly macho and camp at the same time, and quite entertaining. However, I'd seen it all before, several Edinburgh festivals ago, so didn't stay long. I wandered back into the main house and took myself off to the snooker room. I tend to play quite a lot of pool while trawling the in-play hangouts in Silicon Valley. Most of the cutting-edge dudes are young and male, and find the idea of playing pool with a mature but well-preserved lady pretty cool. Often they'll drop their guard when they realize they're going to get beaten, or become a little too relaxed and open if I let them win against the odds. Honing putting skills on a snooker or a billiard table is good practice for this sort of thing. If you can regularly make pots from across 11.5 feet of green baize, switching to a pool table gives you the impression that the pockets have suddenly swollen to the diameter of basketball hoops. Adrian Potenhot was there before me, also indulging in some solitary play. He looked tired. He was polite, almost deferential, and gave up the table for me, refusing the offer of a game. He exited the room with a wary but knowing smile. I looked at my reflection in the room's tall windows. I was frowning. A tiny sparkle of light, way in the distance, caught my eye, and I moved closer to the window. The snooker room was on the second floor of Bliss-Craig. Third, if you counted the American way, the last main floor before the servants' quarters in the attics. I remembered that from here, on a clear night, you could see the lights of Harrogate. Another distant blossom of light rose above the town. Somebody was letting off fireworks. It was 2 days after Guy Fawkes Night, but a lot of people held their displays over to the Friday or Saturday after the more traditional 5th of November. I leant against the window frame, arms crossed, watching. "You look sad, Kate." I jumped, which is not like me at all, and turned round. The voice had been male, though I half expected to see Miss Heggis standing there, just rematerialized. Suvinder Dung, looking tired and a little sad himself, was standing by the snooker table, dressed in one of his Savile Row suits, tie undone, waistcoat unbuttoned, hair less than perfect. I was annoyed at myself for not having heard him or spotted his reflection. "Did I look sad?" I asked, giving myself time to gather my wits. "I thought so. What are you watching?" He came closer and stood beside me. I remembered watching our own fireworks the night before on the terrace, and him putting his arm round my waist. I edged away from him a little, trying to make it look as though I was just making room for him, but getting the distinct impression that he was perfectly aware of what I was really doing. He gave me a small, maybe apologetic smile, and did not try to touch me. I wondered if he even remembered our early morning telephone conversation. "Fireworks," I said. "Look." "Ah, yes, of course. Gunpowder, treason, and plot, and all that sort of thing." "That sort of thing," I agreed. There was an awkward silence. "Pretty good view for a billiards room," I said. He looked at me. "They're usually on the ground floor because of the weight," I explained. He nodded and looked thoughtful. "Are you perhaps a Catholic, Kate?" "What?" "You looked so sad. The plot, in which Guy Fawkes was taking part, was an attempt to restore the Catholic succession to England, was it not? I thought perhaps you were lamenting to yourself his lack of success in blowing up the Houses of Parliament." I smiled. "No, Prince, I was never a Catholic." "Ah." He sighed and looked out the window at the distant lights. He smelled a little of smoke and some old-fashioned scent. His eyes looked sunken and dark. He seemed lost in his own thoughts. "Oh, well." I hesitated, then said, "You look a little low yourself, Prince. Has it been a long day?" "Most," he said. "Most long." He stared out of the window. He cleared his throat. "Ah, dear Kate." "Yes, Suvinder?" "About our telephone conversation this morning." I held up my hands as though to catch a basketball at chest height. "Suvinder," I said, "it's all right." I hoped I might settle the issue with just that gesture and those words, plus a look of friendly sympathy and understanding, but the Prince had obviously already decided he was going to have his say. I hate it when people are so damn programmed. "I hope you are not offended." "I was not, Prince. As I said at the time, I was annoyed at being woken up, but the sentiments were most flattering."
"They were," he swallowed. "Sincere, but ill put."
"The sincerity was by far the more obvious quality, Suvinder," I said, and even surprised myself at the way the words came out. The prince looked pleased. He gazed out the window again. We both watched the few rising sparks. I was thinking about how high up we were, about the crags and cliffs and the undulating hills between us and the town, when he said, "It is all so flat here, isn't it?" I looked at him. "Are you homesick, Shavinder?" "Perhaps, a little." He glanced at me. "You have only been to Thulan once, haven't you, Kate?" "Just the once, and very briefly." "It was the rainy season then. You did not see it at its best. You should return. It is very beautiful at this time of year." "I'm sure it is. Maybe one day." He gave a small smile and said, "It would please me greatly." "That's very kind, Shavinder." He bit his lip. "Well, then, will you tell me why you are looking so despondent, dear Kate?" "I don't know whether I'm just naturally reticent, or it's some business-inspired wariness to do with giving people a handle on my possible weaknesses. But normally I'm loath to share any backstory, as Hollywood would call it, stuff. Anyway, I said, I suppose I always find fireworks kind of sad. I mean, fun too, but sad all the same." Shavinder looked surprised. "Why is that?" "I think it goes back to when I was a little girl. We could never afford fireworks, and my mother didn't like them anyway. She was the kind of person who hid under the kitchen table when there was thunder. The only fireworks I ever had of my own were a few sparklers one year, and I managed to burn myself with one of those. Still have the scar, see?" I showed him my left wrist. "Oh, dear," he said. "Sorry, where?" "There. I mean, I know it's tiny. It looks like a freckle or something, but, well..." "To have no fireworks as a child. That is sad." I shook my head. "It's not that, though. What we used to do was, on November the 6th each year, my pals and I would go around the town where I lived, collecting spent fireworks. We'd dig the Roman candles up out of the ground and search for rockets in the woods and people's gardens. We tramped all over the bits of waste ground, looking for those bright tubes of cardboard. They were always wet and soggy, and the paper was just starting to unravel, and they smelled of dampness and ashes. We used to stick them in a big pile in our gardens, as though they were fresh and unused. The thing was to have more fireworks and bigger ones than your friends. I found it helped to go further afield, to where the better-off people had their displays." "Oh, so you were not just tidying them up?" "I suppose we were doing that too, inadvertently, but really it was kind of a competition." "But why is that sad?" I looked at his big, dark, melancholy face. "Because there are few things more forlorn and useless than a damp, used firework. And when I look back, it just seems so pathetic that we used to treasure the damn things." I shrugged. "That's all." The prince was quiet for a while. A few more rockets lit up the skies above Harrogate. "I used to be frightened of fireworks," he said, "when I was smaller." "The noise?" "Yes. We have fireworks on many of our holy days and on the monarch's birthday. My father would always insist that I let off the biggest and loudest of them. It used to terrify me. I would never sleep the night before. My nurse would stop my ears with wax, but still when I set off the larger mortars, the blast would all but knock me head over heels, and I would start to weep. This displeased my father." I didn't say anything for a while. We watched the tiny, silent sparks climbing, spreading, falling in the distance. "Well, you're in charge now, Shavinder," I told him. "You can ban fireworks if you want." "Oh, no," he said, and looked mildly shocked. "I could never do such a thing. No, no. They are traditional, and, besides, I came to tolerate them." He smiled hesitantly. "I would even say that now I love them." I put my hand out and touched his arm. "Good for you, Prince." He looked down at my hand and seemed to be about to say something. Then his secretary B.K. Bousand appeared at the door, clearing his throat. Savinder Tsong looked round, nodded, then smiled regretfully. I must go. Good night, Kate. Good night, Savinder. I watched him pad quickly, silently away, then turned back to look out of the dark window, waiting for more of the tiny lights climbing above the town. But there were none. Chapter 5. You bitch! You asked for it. I was just trying to help. So was I. What do you mean? Well, you spoke so highly of this Dr. Pegging. I thought I'd give him something more to work on. You can afford it. Think of the poor man's fees. And I think you've got a crush on him anyway. Gee, I imagine calling up a complete stranger thinking they're your best friend is probably worth a whole year's extra treatment. Ex-best friend. Whatever. Oh, Kate, don't be so horrible. I'm sorry, Luce. Bygones, I suppose. Word came through from Jebet E. Dessou's people that the middle of the week was far too late to meet up. They wanted me there ASAP. So, Uncle F's Lancia Aurelia to Leeds Bradford, where some sort of fuck-up, a British regional aeroflot, a fairly regular occurrence, judging by the bitter comments of some of my fellow non-passengers, meant I had to hire a helicopter from a company in the airport. I phoned our corporate lawyers to let them know we'd be charging BA for the relevant amount on my company credit card. I'm with the prince on this one. I don't like helicopters either, or light aircraft for that matter, though in my case it's just because of the statistics. Anyway, to Heathrow in a Bell Jet Ranger with a business-like pilot, who thankfully didn't indulge in any small talk, then the tiny windowed, luxuriously upholstered cigar tube that is Concorde. No free seats, and I was sat next to a smug advertising account director who was himself invasively well-upholstered and determined to make the most of both the free champagne and 2 hours of enforced intimacy. I slipped my earphones on and turned up the Walkman. Sheryl Crow at volume shut him up. I fell asleep after the album finished and woke up as we were decelerating through bumpy clouds. I was in that drowsy, disconnected state where the bits of the brain that dream dreams and come up with crazy ideas haven't been brought back on message by the rational part. So that everything goes a bit haywire. And I remember watching the U.S. coast far, far below and thinking, well, here I am, and Stevens in Washington, D.C., and at least if there's some comprehensive worldwide catastrophe, we'll be on the same continent. In the event of some deep impact-type disaster, if I survived, I could start walking and attempt to find him. Yes, and Mrs. B might have died tragically, and we could start a new life together. I shook myself out of it and looked out my U.S. passport to speed the formalities when we landed. JFK, an American 737 to Chicago. Iffy lunch, but the coffee had improved. A slim commuter Fokker to Omaha, and a very noisy military-looking Huey to Jebet E. Dessou's vast property on the Nebraska-South Dakota border. 80,000 acres of plains, cattle, scrub, trees, roads like a map grid, and all the dust you could eat. The co-pilot, who helped strap me in, insisted I wear a pair of heavy olive-green headphones for the journey. My hair, which had survived intact for 4 flights, 1 ocean and half a continent, but which has always reacted badly to hats and serious headphones, was going to need fixing later on. Half an hour in, we hit some low-level turbulence over a series of pine-covered ridges. My lunch began to let me know it hadn't really settled down properly and was thinking of relocating. I considered the potentially onomatopoeic name of the helicopter I was traveling in, and tried to take my mind off my nausea by thinking of other modes of transport with dubious names, but only got as far as Sikorsky and the Cess in Cessna before we reached calm air again, and my lunch decided that, on balance, it was happy where it was.
We landed in late afternoon in a dusty airport on the outskirts of what looked like a small deserted town, kicking up a great rolling ochre cloud. "Welcome to Big Bend, ma'am," the pilot said. "Thanks." I took my time unclipping my harness and disconnecting the headphones while the dust settled. An ancient Willis Jeep in U.S. Army colors roared up and sat just outside the limit of the slowing rotor blades. The breeze was cold and sharp and dry beneath a lapis sky stroked with feathers of high pink cloud. I could hear the steady crack, crack, crack of heavy machine gun fire from some way off. The co-pilot dumped my bags in the back of the open Jeep and jogged back to the Huey, which was powering up again. "Miss Tellman?" The driver was a grizzled but healthy-looking guy, a decade or so older than me, dressed in army fatigues. He stuck out one hand. "Eastill, John Eastill. That all your luggage?"
"How do you do?" "Yes, it is."
"I'll take you to your cabin. Hang on." He spun the Jeep's wheel and gunned the engine. We roared away from the Huey. "Sorry it's not a limo."
"That's all right. Good to get some fresh air."
Actually, I was pleasantly surprised by the way Mr. Eastill drove. It was a lot more relaxing than Uncle Freddy's floor the pedal and damn the speed bumps banzai style. "Take you long to freshen up, Miss Tillman?" Eastill asked. "Mr. Dessous would like to meet with you directly."
5 minutes.
My cabin was a 10-minute drive away, a sprawling wooden thing set in amongst the pines, overlooking a slow-flowing river winding through a shallow valley carpeted with long, pale grass. While Eastill waited in the Jeep outside, I hung up my suit carrier, washed my face, squirted perfume behind my ears, dragged a brush through my hair, a toothbrush across my teeth, and plunked the sad-faced monkey on a bedside table. The walk-in provided a skiing jacket, which I pulled on as I strode out to the Jeep. We drove back into town, through its deserted streets and out the far side. We arrived at an old drive-in movie theater, a huge field shaped like a baseball ground, with the gantry for a vast screen at the wide end, though there was no screen, just the slim web of girders of its support structure. There were a lot of trucks and heavy rigs scattered round, and 2 big mobile cranes, one of them with its jib extended, and its body raised up off the ground by its extended jacks. Short, rusty posts, which must have carried the speakers for the parked cars, were arranged in serried rows across the weed-strewn lot. We parked alongside a handful of 4-wheel drives and sport utilities by the projection building, which looked a lot like a concrete bunker with no proper windows, but a scattering of small rectangular apertures, all facing in the direction of the absent screen. A long tube poked out of one hole.
"Miss Tillman, good to meet you. Jibbity Dessous. Call me Jeb. I don't answer to much else. I'll call you Miss Tillman till I get to know you better, if that's all right with you. How was your flight? Cabin okay?"
Bustling out of a door in the projection building came a large, red-faced man, dressed in the sort of speckled beige army fatigues the world has come to associate with the Desert Storm campaign. He wore a similarly camouflaged cap. Incongruously, it was the wrong way round, as though he was trying to look New York hip of about 5 years ago, from under which stuck tufts of hair that might have been sandy or just yellowing white. He thrust out one massive hand. His grip was delicate, even sensitive. "How do you do, Jeb? Everything's been good." He let go and stepped back to look at me.
"You're a fine-looking woman, Miss Tillman. Hope you don't mind me telling you that. My opinion of my dumbass nephew has gone up, and that takes a lot of doing, I'll tell you."
"How is Dwight?"
"Oh, still stupid."
He nodded at the Jeep.
"Come on, I'll take you to him."
He looked up at the sky with a frown, then pulled his cap the right way round. Jebet E. Dessous' driving style was more muscular than that of Mr. Eastill, who sat in the back, holding on tight and chewing on a cold cigar.
"Sing us a song, John,"
Dessous shouted, as we swung round the outskirts of the deserted town.
"What you want to hear?"
Eastill asked.
I got the impression this was not an unusual request. "Anything." Dessous looked over at me and tapped the center of the Jeep's bare metal dashboard. "Can't get any sort of sound system in these things," he said. I just nodded. John Eastill launched into an enthusiastic, no, make that just loud, rendition of an old song I vaguely recognized but couldn't place until he got to the chorus, when I realized it was Dixie Chicken by Little Feat. Dessous tried singing along too, but was patently tone-deaf. We headed along the bottom of a small dry creek towards the jumbled shape of a sprawling stone and log-built cabin, which looked like it owed something to Frank Lloyd Wright. Probably an apology. "Boy comes here to write," Dessous shouted at me. "I see. How's he doing?" "Oh, got some play opening in New York, so he says. Dumbass fool probably financed it himself. So wants to make it in Hollywood, get his name above the titles. That's what, well, you'll hear."
Uncle Freddie seemed to think Dwight had some mad scheme you wanted me to talk him out of.
"I don't want to prejudge anything here, Miss Tillman. I don't know you, don't know which way you'll jump. I just want you to be honest with the boy. He talks about you a lot. Might listen to you. Sure as hell doesn't listen to me."
"I'll do my best."
"Yeah, well, just give it your best shot."
We stopped outside. He still stayed with the Jeep again, while Dessous jumped out, strode to the door, hammered on it once, and marched in.
"Dwight!"
he hollered as I followed him.
"You decent boy! Got a lady here to see you."
He pulled his cap off and ruffled his hair. The cabin's shady interior was all long, low couches, split levels and rugs over naked concrete, both underfoot and on the walls. From a distant room came a whoop, and Dessous turned in that direction.
Hold on, just backing up."
We found nephew Dwight in a bedroom with a view over the creek. The broad bed was covered in sheets of paper. On the desk by the window stood an elderly Apple Mac. Dwight was standing in front of the machine, clicking with the mouse. He glanced round.
"Yo, Uncle! Hi, Kate! How the hell are you?"
Dwight was a sharply featured, awkwardly tall guy, only a little more than half my age. He was barefoot and wearing jeans and a dressing gown. His mid-length brown hair was half held in an unraveling ponytail. He had a goatee beard and patchy stubble. He tapped the keyboard, turned the screen off, and then came over to me, took both my hands in his, and kissed me wetly on both cheeks.
Mwah! Great to see you! Welcome!"
"Hello, Dwight."